And good morning and hello, and a very warm welcome from Ian and I to this Crayfish Conservation Manual book launch and workshop. We're here today to introduce both the book and to have a little workshop to find out what you guys are all up to. So just to introduce me, I'm Jen Nightingale. I'm the UK Conservation Manager at the Bristol Zoological Society. I've been in the role for quite a few years, and I've been basically working on crayfish for, probably about sort of 15 years or so. I've got a great interest in arc sites, establishment and captive breeding, and also looking at optimizing aquaculture techniques for crayfish. So that's me, and over to Ian.
Yeah, hello, I'm Ian Marshall. I'm Biodiversity Technical Specialist for the North East area at the Environment Agency, and I'm also National White Claw Crayfish Lead for the Environment Agency as well. Historically, I've written the national strategy for the conservation of white claw crayfish, and have helped set up a number of regional and local groups in order to help conserve the species presently and into the future. And very happy to be here with you all.
Thanks, Ian. So just to run through, so the plan for this morning, we're going to introduce the book, what we've done, what we've written, and then we're going to listen to a few of our contributors doing their case studies, which should be quite nice. We've got some excellent presentations coming up, I think, to each of the chapters. And then we're going to have a workshop, a sort of short workshop this morning, really trying to gather what you're all up to, because this is an excellent opportunity. We've realized that we haven't had a national crayfish conference for a while, so this is a really good opportunity to find out what's happening in each of the regions and how best to coordinate and really link up conservation efforts. So we're going to be asking you a few questions, a bit of a sort of program going on, a little bit of software, just to really try and consolidate. And then the idea is from the outputs, what we'll do is we'll send them to you. So if there's anything sensitive, please do let us know. We are going to be recording the whole session today, and we will be sending out a recording to all of you once we've collected the information. So I hope that makes sense. And as I say, do let us know in the private chat if you're not happy for recordings to go out. So moving on, we'd like to tell you a little bit about the book and how it has come about. What we realized, Ian and I, we probably met up in, what year did we meet, Ian, to discuss this?
Was it 2019? Was it 2019? May have been 2018.
I think it might have been 2018. Anyway, Ian happened to come along to the zoo and have a look at the hatchery there. We got chatting and we thought it'd be really good idea to sort of write something on arc sites. We realized there was lots of separate guidelines for white claw crayfish, and that although there's some fantastic information out there, that some of it was now a wee bit dated, and that things were sort of in lots of different documents and not really consolidated, like there are other handbooks for other species. So we thought we'd start with an arc site. Inevitably, what happened is the thing grew, and we ended up deciding we would pretty much do an entire book on crayfish conservation, really consolidating, because the more we looked at it, the more we realized that actually one thing was really interconnected with another, so it made sense to write about the whole conservation aspect, including all of the elements. We also realized there was a lack of information currently with the new legislation coming out, and especially things like the new English laws and Brexit. So things were changing in terms of sort of conservation status. And we realized that there was very little written on not just captive breeding and aquaculture, which is a recognized form of helping to combat species decline, but also that there wasn't really much on mitigation, which is very relevant with lots of development happening. And there was a lot of call for this and requests from ecological consultancies. And as long as on top of the requests from consultancies, also requests from our own peer groups, some pressure for someone to write an updated book where it would all be in one place. So that's really how it came about. And so what does this book cover? Well, the chapters we've written, the first one's just a sort of background on the ecology of crayfish and the status. And then we move on to principles of crayfish conservation. So this is really looking at strategically how to develop conservation action plans with Ian leading on nationally. He's very well placed, having written the national plan. I've also steered up the Southwest Crayfish Partnership for over a decade now and developed strategies for them. So it's really about joined up thinking at landscape and catchment level, really, for crayfish conservation to be as effective as you can. We then talk about crayfish surveys, the various different survey techniques up to the date when we wrote it, and basically how to plan the surveys, very much taking in the kind of topography and the aspect of your area and your regional considerations. And then we move on to what we were originally planning to do, ARC sites. So that really starts right from the beginning of the desktop analysis all the way through to the long-term monitoring and that sort of stakeholder commitments, sort of right from the beginning to the end. And also asking these questions, is that necessarily the right thing to do, or would some ecological restoration be more appropriate? So really thinking right from the beginning, is this what we need to do? And if so, these are the processes to understand that it's quite complex. There's many elements, and there are lots of stakeholders involved in ARC sites. And then we move on to mitigation, which is a great chapter written by Ian, single-handedly, I think that one of my favorite chapters. And it's really comprehensive in terms of mitigation. So this one does talk about mitigation for both white-claw crayfish populations and invasive crayfish, to what to do in different scenarios if there is, if development is happening, or some scenario where these animals need to be moved. And then my little kind of, the bit where I kind of really felt there were gaps in the literature, so captive breeding. So that's really based on a lot of my PhD, where I looked at various different sort of optimizing aquaculture techniques for breeding and production of captive animals. So we talk in depth about kind of captive breeding, and it's great that Ollie Brown from Kinrig Hatchery in Wales has also contributed, because he does also have a hatchery, so that's lovely. So it's not just me talking. And then we discuss comms and outreach, recognizing that it's a really important element of any conservation is the communication, the outreach, basically highlighting the program and what people can do in the future. And then we've got the case study section. So what we've done is we've linked each chapter to at least one or more case studies, where we've invited various different contributors to really talk about specific case studies relating to the chapter contents, to really bring it into, sort of bring it to the fore, making you sort of understand in terms of real examples. So hopefully we felt this was a really important element of it. At the end, we've got a bibliography. Now, this isn't by any means a complete comprehensive list of references. We've picked out a few relevant references for each of the chapters where you can get some more in-depth information. And then at the back, we've got some appendices and forms. These are to help you and guide you in the field. So hopefully these will be relevant and useful documents for your field work. Over to you.
Yeah. Hi, Jen. Yeah, thanks for that. That's brilliant. And I think we'll just start here with a little sneak peek here of the book. So we've been really thorough, I feel, in terms of explanation and description of all the various techniques and the background of crayfish, really helping people that perhaps don't have a background in astroecology like myself and Jen, really get right down to the nuts and bolts of everything. And we really tried to make it a very visually appealing manual as well, just because we realized that there's a lot of people that get involved in crayfish conservation, and we didn't want it to be a purely academic text. We wanted it to be practical conservation focused at heart. So it does go into a lot of detail, but you can see in the bottom left of the screen there, the tables summarizing all the information from each section as a quick reference guide. And equally, we have various diagrams within the book to help really conceptualize how things should be done on the ground when you're undertaking conservation or mitigation work. So, for instance, in the bottom right hand corner there, it's all about sorting crayfish when you're doing a drawdown operation. And equally in the top right, we just had to have a bit of a habitat diagram in there as well. So yeah, we really wanted to be very accessible, and you know, if people have the inclination and they have the passion, that they could pick this up, talk to the right people, and get out there and get some positive conservation work done for the species. So yeah, justifications for the book. I think what we really wanted to have was a single publication that people could go to and say, right, if I do things from this book, in all likelihood, we're going to have a success when it comes to conservation. As Jen mentioned before, there was a lot of good information out there, but it was sometimes spread across multiple documents. Sometimes the information was 10 years old, and I think people have come to myself and said, you know, this was published in the early 2000s, is it still relevant? So it just needed updating, really, and that would help ensure consistent methodology when, say, license applications are being submitted to Natural England for arc site creation, or for when people are, say, submitting for flood risk activity permits to the Environment Agency. And it stops that to and fro and that uncertainty of what needs to be submitted as best practice. The intention of the manual is that it is a national guidance document. So my understanding is Natural England will be referencing this when licenses, such as the A29 license and the CL23, given out to organisations and individuals. The manual will be referenced as best practice. So yeah, although we had to stop writing at some point because the book did become quite a bit of a size, which I think is a good thing. I think we've got everything in there that needed to be in there, but there were a few things that we did have to leave out. So one of them was invasive crayfish control. It is mentioned, but it's not discussed in detail. There's some excellent work that is already out there by the likes of Stephanie PA and Paul Stebbing. That is readily available. It's freely available online, and I would recommend that people do read into that if it's something that they do feel is relevant. But also, sort of invasive crayfish control wasn't really the steer that we wanted the book to go in. It's much more about the conservation of the species. In some cases, invasive crayfish control can be considered, but we really wanted to sort of push the conservation angle a little bit more. Although practically speaking, the book can be applied to any area, we had to stick with English legislation only. If we started going into Scottish, Welsh and Irish and European, that will probably be a whole book by itself. So if somebody else wants to write that book, feel free, and we will reference it in future versions. As kind of briefly mentioned by Jen earlier, we're only covering kind of the main survey and trap types that have been used extensively. New ones have come out recently, like the Pritchard trap, but we felt that we really need to see those put to use a little bit longer before they're to be included. In terms of the content, it was pretty much completed by the end of 2020, and it took as long to design it as it did to write it, I think. It was kind of me and Jen thought we were done, and then iteration after iteration after iteration, we were still finding things that we wanted to change at the 11th hour, but I feel we got there. You'll probably find the odd little thing in there that you think, oh, I'd maybe change that, but that's fine. And we would definitely recommend that you contact us if you do spot anything. As said, it's a large book. It's not a field guide size, so this is something that you'll probably keep in the office and reference, particularly when you're planning work or responding to, say, a planning application or submitting one or submitting for an environmental permit. And further editions may be written if we find the time, which I think we would. So yeah, look forward to those in the future, in future years. So how to purchase. So it is available on the NHBS website. There's a link there, and we will include a link in the email as well when we are emailing out the recording of this this presentation. Currently, it's hard copies only, but the PDFs for the various forms included in the book. So one is a survey form that's been created by Stephanie PA, and the other is a crayfish population profile form, which is very useful for arc site setup, and also for continual monitoring and management of the habitats and the species present there. If you do make a purchase, we would be really happy if you could please leave a review on NHBS, because these things sell by the reviews and people's comments. So yeah, if you could do that, we'd be very, very happy. Equally, if you have any comments on the book, constructive criticism, please, then please do email them to myself or Jen. As I said, second edition will be written, probably in the next few years. There's likely to be changes in legislation coming down the track. And also we are considering writing a quick reference field guide. It's something that has come back as people have purchased the book and said, this is great, but it'd be good to have something quick and easy we can have in the field, just to reference, say, in terms of capacity for storage containers, for movement of crayfish, identification, or all that kind of thing. And so we'll be working on that over the next year or so. So yeah, just finally, acknowledgements. Thank you to all our case study authors for submitting some very concise, very detailed, very informative case studies that really helped to bring the book to life. We really wanted to help people conceptualize the ideas and the themes within the book, and I think these case studies have really helped to do that, so a massive thank you. Also a massive thank you to our reviewers for checking the content, and also for our editors for checking the spelling and checking that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and also to our funders, which are listed there at the bottom of the slide. So yeah, I think that's everything from me, Jen.
Yep, that's brilliant. Thank you, Ian, and just also a really big thank you to Claire Chalice from Inkwood Designs, our graphic designer, and Abby Stubbs, her amazing illustrator, for all the pictures. You saw in the sneak peek that fabulous schematic, and basically we'd sketch out something and she'd turn it into something beautiful. So very, very pleased with the designers, who are incredibly patient with us all the way through, and our many changes and reviews, and they did it at a reduced rate because it was a sort of charity conservation project, which was very lovely indeed. So so that's us. That's about the book. So you've got details of where you'd like to purchase it, and yeah, we'd love to hear some reviews as well, please. And now, without any more chat from us, I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker. So this is Dr. Ben Rushbrook. He's from the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. He's one of the ecologists there, and he and I have been working on the river ancient at Hampshire, captive breeding white-clawed crayfish for their river restoration program. So Ben will be talking about crayfish ecology and his case study, which relates to that. So over to Ben, and thank you.
My name is Ben Rushbrook. I'm a principal ecologist at the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. I'd like to thank Jen and Ian for the opportunity to talk to you for a little bit about the ecology of the white-clawed crayfish on the River Itchen. The Trust has been leading the conservation of white-clawed crayfish in Hampshire since 2008. And this has been delivered through our partnership project, the Southern Chalkstream Project. This is a project where we work with the Vitalcrest Conservation Trust, Environment Agency and Natural England, all of which have funded this project at various points. But we also very closely work with Bristol Zoological Society, Sparshot College, and it's important to emphasise that this isn't delivered on the Trust's land. This is all done on private land. So without the support of the landowners, the river keepers and the anglers, all our conservation work wouldn't really be possible. So the Southern Chalkstream Project looks to protect, promote and preserve chalkstream invertebrates and focuses on 3 key species. Southern damselfly, shown here on the left, white-clawed crayfish at the top, and as I'm sure you know, those people working with white-clawed crayfish in the UK unfortunately have to work also with the invasive non-native species, the thick-clawed crayfish, shown here at the bottom. Follow the structure of the handbook. I'm going to talk about who, white-clawed crayfish, where, what happened, what we did, what we discovered, and what we concluded. So the who, the white-clawed crayfish. Though there are over 600 species of crayfish across the world, the white-clawed crayfish is the only species that's native to Britain. It's nocturnal, utilising natural refugia during the day to hide, and then coming out to forage at night. It has a wide range of prey items, including slow-moving invertebrates, but also will feed on decaying matter, detritus, and on plants. They molt to grow, so they will break out of that hard exoskeleton and then pump fluid around the body to increase their size. The frequency of that molt varies with age, so the young crayfish will molt a number of times within a year to increase their size rapidly to reduce the risk of predation, whereas the older, larger crayfish will molt only once or twice a year, focusing their energy into the production of sperm and eggs. Crayfish will compete with each other for food and space. This results in agonistic interactions and can result in damage to the crayfish, so loss of limbs, loss of their claws. But actually, really impressively, the crayfish can regenerate these limbs through the molting process. So it will take a series of molts. It won't just immediately grow back, but actually, over a period of time, the crayfish can regenerate lost limbs or lost claws. White-clawed crayfish mate in the autumn, and the female holds the eggs through to the next spring. And then they become less active in the winter. Historically, they were found in a variety of water bodies in the UK, so this was flowing systems such as rivers and streams, but also still water bodies such as lakes and reservoirs, and essentially anywhere where the geology and the water quality was suitable to support. They're like clean, base-rich waters with a calcium input. This is really important for the production of that hardened exoskeleton. They also like well-oxygenated waters. They're an aquatic species, so they need sufficient water to survive. They also prefer low turbidity because a high amount of suspended sediment getting into their gills can actually cause them problems. And though within a single site they can tolerate a range of habitat, a range of temperatures, for example, lakes kind of vary from very low in the winter to high in the summer. A rapid fluctuation in temperatures can also be something that's problem for white-clawed crayfish, and therefore they're less likely to be found in sites where you have frequent rapid changes in temperature. So we find white-clawed crayfish in sites where we hit that threshold for the geology and the water quality, and within those sites they'll be using cryptic microhabitat features for natural refugia during the day. So this could be under large cobbles, within submerged vegetation, or maybe even within the crevices of warm brickwork for bridges. And it's the density of these refugia that will influence the density of the crayfish. So within a single river, if you have a section with lots of cobbles or with lots of habitat for white-clawed crayfish, and then a section a short distance away with much fewer features, you're going to find a much higher density of white-clawed crayfish in that first. So that's a very quick overview of white-clawed crayfish. So where did this happen? The study that I'm going to speak about, well, it was on the River Itchen Special Area of Conservation, and it's also a site of special scientific interest. This is a river that rises in mid-Hampshire, flows through Winchester and enters the Solent through Southampton Water. Classic chalk river, therefore supports those four characteristic reaches of the winterbourne section that would dry in summer all years, the perennial headwaters which will always flow, classic chalk streams which are slightly bigger, such as the one in the picture shown, and then your large chalk rivers lower down the system. And these rivers typically will have a really good water chemistry, be of good quality, they'll be base rich from the minerals coming through the chalk, and have that calcium that the crayfish require for their exoskeleton. Typically, they'll have a high dissolved oxygen, low turbidity, and have stable flow and temperature regimes. So all in all, providing a lot of the thresholds that's required for white-clawed crayfish. On top of that, they're often complex habitats. They have complex micro habitats that can be used for refuges, such as the cobbles we can see in the bottom right, the root systems, top right, and often where it's a healthy chalk river, it will have abundant vegetation, as shown in the pictures on the left. So therefore, not only does it hit the threshold, but it has that high density of features that can support a high density. So here we see the historic distribution of white-clawed crayfish in the 1990s. And we can see that the river riches supported a higher density of species. Look at the current distribution, well, that's changed a lot, and actually white-cod crayfish in Hampshire are very much focused in the headwaters of the River Itchen system. So what happened? Well, a flow regime, a flow augmentation scheme was set up and developed in the 1970s on the River Itchen, focusing on the upper reaches. And what happens was water would be pumped from the aquifer directly into the headwaters to increase the amount that could be extracted downstream, to dilute pollution from waste treatment works. And the idea was that it also would improve the ecology. However, over time, it became clear that actually it was only the addition of water for abstraction that this really provided. And in 2011, it was agreed that this would be tested. And the Trust was asked to undertake some ecological monitoring, both for white-cod crayfish and for invertebrates, aquatic invertebrates. We looked at the potential direct impacts, so by changing the flow regime, this resulted in the drift of white-cod crayfish or invertebrates. But we also looked at the potential indirect impacts. So we looked at physical parameters and collected data on water chemistry. And prior to the running of this scheme, we decided to run a couple of baseline surveys to give us that baseline data. And what happened was that we actually found that some of the crayfish were exhibiting this anomalous behaviour. So actually several within a specific location were found in exposed locations. So rather than be hiding under or hiding within natural refugia, they were on top of the gravels, on top of flints, walking over vegetation. Some were active, some were sedentary. But it was important to emphasise that though this site had been studied in detail in the late 90s and 2000s, this was something that had never been observed. So we're obviously very worried, and we immediately thought this could be an outbreak of crayfish plague, and the use of the augmentation scheme was postponed. However, strangely, we only found this in upper of two very close sites. So they're separated by 600 metres. We had the upper fob down site and the lower fob down site. And actually, we're only finding this anomalous behaviour in the upper, these two sites. We sent some crayfish off to sea factor analysis, and thankfully it came back negative for crayfish plague, which was obviously a huge relief. But it didn't take away from the fact that there was an unknown stressor on this vulnerable population, this isolated population of white-cod crayfish. So what we did, we decided to look at this anomalous behaviour and develop a study to try and identify the potential cause, but also to understand whether the operation of the augmentation scheme would affect the expression of this behaviour. So we developed two long-term monitoring reaches, those two sites that were close together, upper fob down and lower fob down, and we decided to go with a fixed time of manual search, so a 30-minute section, and we would look at both exposed locations, so we would scan the riverbed for crayfish that were on the gravels or on the vegetation, but we'd also look under cobbled and other natural refugia, looking to see if we had crayfish showing the normal behaviour or the typical behaviour of being hidden during the day. Any crayfish that were molting or that weren't able to be captured, we obviously couldn't collect data for, but we counted them and we estimated whether they were adult or juvenile. And this gave us a measure of crayfish per unit effort, the number of crayfish that we had collected within that 30-minute period. What it also allowed us to calculate from those individuals was the expression of anomalous behaviour within that reach. So the percentage of individuals that were out rather than under and hidden within natural refugia. We also collected biometric data for all the crayfish we were able to capture. One thing you will note is that with juveniles here, the measurement is slightly higher than is now in the handbook, but at the time this was the recommendation. But all the others are hopefully characteristics that you're familiar with. And we did 13 surveys in total to measure the level of expression throughout both prior and the running of the augmentation scheme. So what did we find? So actually, when we looked at the upper section, we found over 600 crayfish, with nearly a third of those expressing this anomalous behaviour. We were able to collect biometric data for over 450 of those individuals. In contrast, at lower Fogdown, we found less than 200 crayfish, and only 2% were found in exposed locations. And actually, this is probably just a consequence of the high level of survey effort that we'd put this section through. So we'd found that actually the expression of this anomalous behaviour was highly localised, but it was persistent throughout our 13 surveys, though it did seem to reduce over the course of the study. So we tried to work out which or what potential factors were impacting or causing this anomalous behaviour. So the first thing we looked at was the flow and the flow regime. So we looked at the level of expression before the scheme was run, when the scheme was being ramped up, when the scheme was running at full output, and then when the scheme was being ramped out. And what we found, there was no significant effect of the flow regime on the expression of the anomalous behaviour in upper Fogdown. So this data from now on that we're going to discuss is only from upper Fogdown. And there's also no significant correlation with the expression of the behaviour and flow rate. Though we did find we're finding fewer crayfish as the survey progressed. But all in all, there was no evidence that the scheme itself was impacting the expression of this anomalous behaviour. So we then compared the age and the size of the individuals that were exposed or showing this anomalous behaviour and those that were exhibiting the typical behaviour of being under refugia. And we found that the crayfish that were out and about that were showing this anomalous behaviour were typically significantly larger, had significantly fewer juveniles, and actually when you only looked at the adults, we still had a significant difference in the size, with the exposed group being much higher. What we've also found was that a large number of the individuals within our study showed some form of damage, whether it was puncture marks, as we see here on the left, potentially from a predator such as an otter, or missing limbs, as we can see the picture on the right. And what we found actually was that the exposed group, those expressing anomalous behaviour, significantly fewer of those were undamaged, and there was a significantly higher prevalence of burn spot, which is a disease where, or an expression of a disease where lots of fungal bacteria or other pathogens get into an area where crayfish is being damaged and cause this red coloration that you see in the right picture. We also looked at Porcelain's disease, which is a microsporidium parasite that affects white-clawed crayfish. And it was potentially considered initially that this could be the cause for behaviour, so we looked at this in quite detail, but we actually only found 22 individuals in total affected with this, so less than 5% of the individuals we found. And though there was an association with more individuals in the exposed group having expression of Porcelain's disease, it wasn't a significant difference. So that's what we found. So we then tried to work out if any of these were the cause of the anomalous behaviour. As I've said earlier, crayfish plague was looked at, and it came back negative, thankfully, but also the localised expression of this behaviour and the fact that it persisted was evident that it wasn't plague. We looked at Porcelain's disease, and again, there was a non-significant association, but actually the level of expression within the study was within the natural range that's been reported. And in fact, we only had 13 of the 184 individuals that we found in exposed locations showing this disease. So there was no evidence that disease was the cause of the anomalous behaviour. However, it is obviously important to emphasise that we only looked at a very small number of potential diseases. There's a whole suite of pathogens and parasites that we didn't study. We found within our study that the crayfish per unit effort was much higher than in previous long-term monitoring studies. And therefore, that thought made us think, well, maybe this diurnal behaviour is due to the population exploding. We're finding more crayfish, maybe there are more crayfish, and therefore there's a density issue. And that competition or a limit of refugia was the factor that was causing this expression. And this was also supported by the fact we had a high level of damage, a high level of agnostic interaction. And this was higher in those exposed individuals. And they also had high prevalence of burn spot. And therefore, there may be increased population risk. However, though we couldn't obviously determine what exactly was and wasn't crayfish, suitable crayfish refugia, there was a large number of cobbles and other refugia that we searched that we thought would be suitable for crayfish that weren't occupied. So therefore, we considered that actually density wasn't the cause of this. Prior to the scheme being run, it was actually quite a dry year, and water flows and water depth was relatively low, and we had relatively high maximum daytime temperatures. This could cause an associated reduction in dissolved oxygen. We know this can alter crayfish behaviour, and with them becoming more likely to be found at the air-water interface or to crawl out of the water. However, within the data we collected, the dissolved oxygen was within the expected levels. And what we would have expected as well was that the flow augmentation scheme would ameliorate this by putting in cooler water. But actually what we found was that, particularly in the main phase of this study, the anonymous behaviour was retained and it wasn't reduced by the introduction of the augmented water. So therefore, again, we don't think that there was any evidence that there was physical or chemical reasons within the parameters we measured that could be causing this anonymous behaviour. Something else that was suggested, whether it was shading, the section that we were studying had quite a high level of dense tree cover, which obviously reduced the light levels in the water. And it was theorised that this could interfere with the sensory perception of the crayfish, and therefore they felt that it was at night time, there was an inferred or actual reduced predation risk associated with this cover, and therefore this encouraged the diurnal foraging. However, again, we think that the light levels within this section is consistent with previous years where we had detailed monitoring done in the late 90s, 2000s, and also it's similar with the lower fog down section we were monitoring and other sections of the itching that we've surveyed. Also, as the study went through, there'd be some leaf loss, but again, until we got towards the real end of the study, we were still having high levels of expression of anomalous behaviour. So again, we don't think shading is the cause. We looked at pollution as a potential impact, but again, we were doing water quality monitoring and there was no evidence that there was any pollution. And again, it's only 600 metres between the upper and the lower fog down site, and for something to be diluted that quickly and not cause the expressive behaviour would be really surprising. So again, we didn't think that was the cause. And it was suggesting potentially early onset of mate searching, but though there was a size, there was no significant sex association in the groups. So again, we didn't think these were the causes. So actually, to be honest, we couldn't find potential causes within that 2011 study. So we continued to monitor, and we decided to do 3 monitoring visits from 2015 up to last year so far. And the behaviours continue to persist in the population. And the findings of this, in terms of potential causes, are very consistent with the original conclusions. So we're not able to determine what's causing this behaviour, but it seems to be highly localised. And it seems to be potentially some kind of subtle change in that area, which is obviously, though it's better than a massive impact on the whole population, it's still a substantial concern. So in summary, we detected an anomalous diurnal behaviour that wasn't observed during detailed monitoring undertaken in the late 90s and early 2000s. We demonstrated that the impacts were at a highly localized level, and it raised significant concerns to us because this is a very important population in a regional context. It's also isolated and vulnerable, so it's really susceptible to going extinct. Unfortunately, we weren't able to determine the cause of this behaviour, but it seems to have remained localised, and it seems to have not impacted the broader population. And there's been no real change in over a decade of monitoring. However, we emphasise that we're still concerned about this because obviously there's an unknown environmental stressor impacting this population, and there's potentially some kind of subtle impact going there that we're not currently able to. So thank you very much for listening to this talk. I hope you enjoy the remaining talks.
Thank you very much, Ben. We haven't really got time for questions and answers at the moment, but I was going to say, Ben, are you happy for people to contact you if they'd like more information? Would that be okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Great. I would just say to everybody that we are recording this the morning, so please be aware of that in terms of chats and information gathering. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Stephanie Piet. Stephanie is a crayfish ecologist with a huge amount of experience. She's written quite a lot of the previous guidelines. She's been incredibly instrumental in this book and has also helped guide it. So obviously a lot of her work has been referenced in it, and we're just trying to kind of work on what she's already produced. Stephanie also is an ecologist with ACOM as well. And Stephanie's going to be talking about principles of crayfish conservation. So chapter 2, basically, with her case study. So over to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Jen. Just need to see if you can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep, can see it. Yep.
Okay. Can you still see my screen?
No.
Okay, I'll just put that back. Oops. Drat. This is me more used to working in teams. Right, are we good to go? Can you see my screen? Excellent.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay.
There we
looking
go.
good.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so monitoring white-clawed crayfish, what we really want to know is whether there's a population present, whether there's any change in abundance, and if there is, do we need to take any action about it, and can we do so? But we have the issue that there are no absolute measures of population, and all we can do is carry out semi-quantitative sampling of one sort or another on various types of program. You've heard a good example here from Ben already. This particular study is in a small watercourse in Leeds. I'll show you that in a minute. The problem is that with variability of populations, you can't be sure if you just do a survey what it is you're sampling. So the questions here are the ones that I started with back in 1998, and really I've been trying to ever since to get a better understanding of the interaction between survey methods and the actual population of crayfish in this stream. Trying to understand the inherent variability between habitat patches, different survey sessions, the seasons, differences between years, between sites, and between methods. For me, it all started with the construction of a new sewer in North Leeds, which got me involved in mitigation work, where we did a complete dewater and bed strip and search to remove crayfish out of the way of construction on around about 40 meters of this stream. Thereafter, I started following the stream, somehow got very hooked on all the stories, and have been looking at Meanwood Beck ever since. That's some 2 days turned into in excess of 22 years with an involvement of quite a lot of other volunteers over the years. So here's the stream in North Leeds. It's a tributary of the River Aire. You can see in the bottom corner there the Leeds Ring Road going across from left to right. The wooded stream valley runs on both sides of the Ring Road and extends down into the urban part of Leeds. For the last kilometre or so, it's all in culvert and the hard structure at the outfall, which provides a very good barrier to any future upstream attempts at invasion by signal crayfish, which are now widespread in the Aire catchment, but not, so far as we know, in the Meanwood Beck catchment. But it's an urban catchment. There's a lot of combined sewer overflows, in urban, bit of urban pollution, and lots of recreational usage. So this is an overview of the monitoring work that we've carried out, and below the black line, the contributions to the research questions about variability. Much of the early work was done by night viewing. That's walked transect with a torch and a viewer, which in my case is an old wooden drawer with the bottom knocked out and replaced by plastic, which is fantastic for viewing in riffles. And you can also put crayfish in when you need to measure them and stick them back. From night viewing at one site, we extended to a series of sites as a sort of cross-calibration exercise before moving on to monitoring with baited traps, which we've been doing since 2009 every year, except 2013, where I had a year off. More recently, we've also been trialing artificial refuge traps, the Handpipe design. I have to admit, I think I made my first Handpipe back in about 2000, but we never actually really field tested those as a method. Couldn't quite resource that as well as all the other things that I was involved in. So other people have done great work. You'll hear some of that later on. But this is the first trial we've done in a pretty high energy stream. And here's the original site. You can see I started with a river corridor survey, not at the usual 500 meter patch, 500 meter stretch, but a mere 100 meters, of which about 20 or 30 is shown here. This is the area that was bed stripped originally and then reinstated. You can see the riffles and glide pools here. The habitat map is pretty accurate. Went out with tape measure and sorted all out. This is the upper part of this. You can see again pools and complex habitat, and of course urban detritus. Here's the famous site of the blue trolley from some supermarket unknown, and this is the famous tree pool here, which initially was a scour pool, and later when the tree fell over, we had a great large woody debris dam. You really get to know the stream at the level of the individual rock when you're doing this kind of intensity of survey. And I knew anytime anybody came in and moved a rock, or a new large branch arrived in the system. So night viewing, here's the, whoops, sorry, back a slide. here's the sort of overlay of the maps that you show, and these are the individual animals that were recorded on the particular occasion. So you can see that's Tree Pool there, Blue Trolley is up there, and this is a sort of bedrock pool with some nice large boulders in it. When you start layering these up together, you can see the distributions very focused on the areas of most favorable habitat. And in combination, there's 2 of the years of survey, quite high catches of crayfish. Here's the evidence that not only do manual surveys show the crayfish in the less energetic areas of the stream, but this also accords with the activity. You can see the habitat area there of pools and slow glides and complex margins. It's about 45%, but 80% of the crayfish activity was in those areas. So this was supported the manual survey work that we undertook, and shows why it's a very good idea to stick your traps in the pools and glides in this sort of stony stream. So here's showing the activity of crayfish around a year. This is trapping right through the year from night viewing right through the year from December to January. So activity isn't nil during the winter and spring, but there really aren't very many animals around, and numbers pick up in the late season. Down in the south of England, you probably have 2 or maybe 3 weeks head start on us in the Yorkshire and the north, but is related to water temperature and also to day length. In September, we get cooling down. We also get mating activity here, but it's all tailing off by the end of September. Below, you can see differences in sexes, with the males active in the early part of the summer. Once the females have got rid of their young, sent them off to develop on their own, the females are very hungry. They've got to feed up, molt, and get ready for the next breeding season. So this explains why baited traps often report a sex bias of males. If the crayfish aren't out, they're not going to be going in the traps. You get to see some really interesting crayfish behaviors when you're out night viewing. You can see them walking about. I've seen feeding behavior. I've seen them gathering moss. And this point here, this rock here, has been a very good crayfish dating site over the years. Male sits there. It's a constriction in the channel. All crayfish walk by there. And in the autumn, females that haven't found a suitable mate come really, I've seen them clustering around here, looking to see who's holding the territory at that spot. Here's all of the night viewing data for the entire period. This is the 1999 data, and we didn't do very much in 2000 and 2001. I had assistance in the first couple of years. Thereafter, as I say, this is just me doing all of the night viewing work. So these later years are all done during the active period during the summer, sort of June to September time, and quite a bit of variation between occasions. But you can see here that there was a marked reduction in after 2005, as evidenced by the box plots above, and weren't sure whether this was entirely due to habitat variation or whether there was a problem with pollution. So I extended the coverage with help from Kerry Fieldhouse at Leeds City Council and a group of volunteers who took on another 5 sites to look at with night viewing. They all did at least five sessions during the year. Oops. Sorry, it's all going a bit, seems to have frozen up here, guys. Yeah, Okay, baited traps. So this is when we started, from 2009, we started using baited traps at the 5 sites where we've been doing night viewing, having previously done some trials with different types of traps, looking to see what their performance was. Fladen traps here, the folding traps, performed well in terms of retention of both trappability and retention of crayfish. Crayfish bait, sardines in oil, absolutely the best. If you set them late in the day, sometimes you actually see the crayfish coming out to follow that irresistible plume of oily sardine wafting down the channel. It's an urban stream, so we have to be very careful about setting traps out of public view, and that slightly constrains 1 or 2 sites. But since we start of traps, I've only ever had 1 trap stolen, so we've been fairly good at keeping them out of the way. The refuge traps here that we've started using are the handpipe traps. They've all been made by Matthew Childs, who is a local man and involved in a community group in the urban park.
Just to give you a 2-minute warning, Stephanie, okay?
Thank you, 2-minute warning. Here's all of the trapping results for the whole season. Don't have time to show all the analysis of this, but it just gives you an impression of the different sites and the degree of year-to-year variability in trapping. They're all done basically around the 1st of September each year, subject to suitable flows. So we have maybe plus or minus a week on that. But that shows you the variations there, and can be used to sort of calibrate studies where you don't do as many sessions. So lessons learned, it's a very dynamic system. Stuff's changing all the time. When big debris dams move, that really makes a difference to habitat. Flow in chalk streams like Ben's using, you tend to get stable recession of flow, not nearly the kind of variation that we get where the river goes up and down like a yo-yo at times. So you've really got to check what's doing. I stick little grass stems up the bank so I can just check that the flow hasn't increased overnight. If the flow increases, the crayfish all hunker down and they don't come out. If you change method, you need to include cross-calibration years. That's really important. In this case, I've been fortunate in that I've personally been able to take part in all of the surveys throughout the period, which means that I pretty much know exactly to within a meter where we usually put the traps. But it's been an opportunity to involve a lot of people, training for ecologists, and we also have local people who come out and help as well. And it's a fantastic opportunity to win friends for crayfish, because the world and his brother walked by with their kids, their dogs, and everybody gets to see and hold crayfish and hear about biosecurity. And it's great fun. So finally, I'd just like to acknowledge that lots of people have been done. This is a completely unfunded project. It's solely a citizens science project. We're all volunteers. It's 23 years of monitoring. The crayfish is still growing strong, and long may it last. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think it's amazing to have such an amazingly long data set and to know a site so intricately. It's just a brilliant opportunity. I love all the engagement that you've done over the years, and what a huge wealth of knowledge this lady has. So thank you so much. Go, sorry, did you have one more slide?
No. That was just a big crayfish. I'll just stop sharing and leave you to hand over.
Thank you so much. So I think what we'll do is, if people do have questions, if you want to pop them into the chat for our guest speakers today, or if you've got questions for Ian and I, do pop them into the chat, because we can get round to them as well, because I appreciate that time's a wee bit tight this morning to get through everything. So without further ado, a very warm welcome to Dr. Nikki Green, who has very recently finished her PhD on crayfish control techniques. Nikki is an independent crayfish ecologist with a huge, I don't know how many years, a couple of decades at least, I think, Nikki, of crayfish ecology experience. Is that right? I don't want to get this wrong. You're still on mute, Nikki.
Yes, I think as I'm about to give a talk, it might be good idea to unmute myself. Yeah, I think nearly 20 years now. Yes.
Thank you.
Is somebody going to load my presentation?
Yes, they are. It's all very seamless over here. So Nikki is going to introduce our chapter 3, which is all about crayfish surveys and techniques. And she's going to relate that in terms of her work on the River Barle and her crayfish control work. So over to you, Nikki. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Dr. Nikki Green, and I'm going to be just talking mostly about artificial refuge traps, which is an area that I've been looking at for most of my crayfish career. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Keris. So I'm briefly going to run through the crayfish survey methods most commonly used. So first of all, we've got our manual methods. So this is things like the hand searches, stone turning, kick sampling, the torch surveys that Stephanie was talking about, netting marginal vegetation, and dive surveys, which is something I've been involved in recently in reservoirs working with Southwest Water. I think the most commonly used methods are the trapping methods, so the baited traps that Stephanie was talking about again, artificial refuge traps, which I think are becoming more popular now, which I've been working with for quite a long time, which I'm going to go into more detail on. Fyke nets are something I haven't tried, but they're supposed to be very effective, particularly if you're trying to remove large numbers of signal crayfish, for example. Another method is eDNA surveys, which are becoming more and more widespread. I think they've had teething troubles at the beginning, but I think they're becoming more and more effective these days. I think Ian might be the person to ask about that. And then dewatering is another method which people use, which is basically removing the water from a stretch of watercourse or a pond to really get at all the crayfish. Next slide, please. So I first started working with artificial refuge traps, ARTs, in about 2004. They were developed by the Hampshire Environment Agency team, and the Devon EA team got wind of them, and we started trialing them on Devon rivers. They basically a series of tubes attached to a metal base, and they act as a habitat attractant. So the crayfish will go in there because it's a safe place for them, and it mimics burrows and it mimics crevices between stones, which is what they would normally utilize. The original ARTs were made of bits of roofing slate glued together with bits of tube glued onto them, and they had a habit of silting up and also falling to pieces on a regular basis. So when we started using them, we found that they were extremely effective at finding white-clawed crayfish in Devon rivers where they're at really, really low density, and they were the only reliable method that we had found that we could actually find them. And so I started to sort of improve on the design and swapped the roofing slates for a metal base, and then using a perforated metal to stop the siltation and riveting the tubes onto the bases. And so what was developed really is the basis of what most people are making for themselves and buying from me today. So as the word got out, more and more people wanted to use them. So I started actually making and selling them about 2008, and I've been doing that ever since. And it's very handy because it gives me a bit of extra funding to do voluntary work on different projects where there isn't any funding, and to be able to sort of supply traps for free or for a discounted rate to people who don't have any funding. So it's a very handy kind of income stream, if you like. So the reasons that I like ARTs, as I said, they detect crayfish at very low density. They have a very low labour input, so you can deploy them and then leave them for a week or two or even longer in between checks. They're good for shallow water and for faster flow, and they catch equal ratios of males and females throughout the year, and they catch a very wide range of size classes. We've had from, I think, 5 mil carapace length up to 68 mil carapace length in the standard sized ART that's in the photograph there. And also there's no bycatch, you don't have to worry about water boils or water shrews or anything like that. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go over a couple of bits of research that I've done on the River Barle on Exmoor. This first bit is from Holly Moser's BSc project. And what she did, we created a series of ARTs with different pipe diameters, and we compared the different types of traps in different types of habitat. And what we found, that there was a definite correlation between pipe size and crayfish size. And you might think, well, that's obvious, because a big crayfish won't go into a small tube because it won't fit. But actually, the reverse is true. A small crayfish won't go into a big tube. And so we kind of figured out that you know, it would be possible to target specific size classes of crayfish by designing a trap to suit them. The other thing that we found was the highest catches, agreeing with Stephanie's recent talk, were in the slow to medium flow, so in the glides and the pools and the slower flowing areas of the rivers. We also found the highest catches were in the sandy and gravelly areas, so the smaller substrates, and that might relate to the fact that in the more rocky areas there were more natural refuges available. So that was what we found there. Next slide, please, Kerith. So this is another piece of research I've done. I did write a paper on this if you're interested, so I could put the link into the chat later if anybody wants it. So over a 2-year period, I compared artificial refuge traps with baited traps, and on the axes on the right and left hand side, that is the size of crayfish, and then the bottom axis is the number of crayfish caught. So you can see that the ARTs caught a far higher number of crayfish overall, and also a much wider size range. And what we also found that they caught 95% of the buried females, so the females carrying eggs, and also 89% of the crayfish in molt, as well as 87% of the total catch overall. Okay, next slide, please. I'm paranoid about running out of time, so I'm going very, very quickly. Right, so what do we use ARTs for? Conservation uses. So obviously we have the detection of low density populations. It also, as well as white-clawed crayfish, it will apply to signal crayfish. So if you have, for example, a recently established signal crayfish population, then you've got a higher chance of detecting it and then being able to do something about it before things get out of hand and it expands and spreads and grows in number. They're also very useful for long-term monitoring of both naturally occurring white-clawed crayfish populations, but also populations in arc sites. And because you can detect buried females and you can detect animals in molt, it gives you very good indicators of how well the population is doing in terms of reproduction and recruitment and growth rates. So it tells you a lot about your arc site as well. And the other thing that it's used quite widely for is within arc sites for the soft release of crayfish into an arc site. So the bottom right hand photograph there, that was a release we did into an arc site last October, where the crayfish were put into the refuge trap, and then the trap was placed into the pond. So as soon as the animals were released, they were in a safe place in their new home. And again, you can use them as a habitat supplement in those sorts of situations as well. Next slide, please. So I've been using ARTs as a control method as well. And the top right-hand graph, this is the total catch rates from ARTs on the River Barle between 2015 and 2021. And you can see overall that after a fluctuation in the first couple of years, which we don't really know why that happened, there's been an overall decrease of around 50% in catch rates over that period. And then the larger graph, this is where I've split the catch rate into 3 size groups. So the top line is the medium-sized crayfish, so 25 to 39 mil carapace length, and this is where we've had the highest reduction. And that stands to reason in a way, because the design of the ART is that the majority of traps will catch, the majority of tubes in each trap will catch animals of that size. But the bottom line is, excuse me, is the small crayfish, so up to 25 mil carapace length. And you can also see an overall decrease, so a fluctuating pattern with that group. And the benefit of catching the smaller animals is that you're taking them out before they get into a breeding age and to reproducing. So next slide, please. So finally, I'm just going to talk about what ongoing research I'm doing into ARTs. So looking at the results from the long-term control efforts, you can see we have had an effect, but it's been fairly slow. So I was hoping to develop a larger capacity ARTs. The top photograph there on the right-hand side just shows a couple of our new designs compared to the standard ART, which is the one on the top left, if you like. And underneath it is my fantastic invention, the double decker, which is a 2-row ART with 32 pipes in it, and then various permutations of that. And the idea is for each trap to catch more crayfish, so more useful from a control perspective. And one of the things I've been doing is I've been trialing them in large still water bodies in partnership with Southwest Water. And that has been quite a head scratcher, really, because you have to think about boating and anchoring and all sorts of things like that, because the trap, first of all, has to be heavy enough to sink to the bottom, to lie flat on the bottom, and to stay put in the face of wind and flow and rises in water levels with rainfall, etc. And so there was quite a lot of thinking involved in trying to figure out how to do that. The other thing was, because we were pulling the traps up from up to 25 meters depth, sometimes the traps would they would plane, so they would come up horizontally, and that would allow crayfish to escape. So we ended up putting a kind of a second yoke with a weight on it, the bottom right photograph, which hopefully will allow the trap to settle on the bed and stay put, and then when pulled in to stay vertical. And the other reason for having longer tubes as well is to minimize escapes during hauling in. So we've been trialing those through the winter, and they're looking pretty promising. But yeah, it's an ongoing project really. And we're going to be monitoring them through till the end of next year, hopefully, with comparisons to baited traps as well. So that's quite a fun project, but not too much fun when you're on a reservoir in Dartmoor in January at 3 degrees. I was wearing 7 layers last month and I was still frozen, but there you go. Another thing, I'm doing the sort of right-hand middle photograph. That's a juvenile trap. So it's a kind of mini double-decker with 20 mil pipes, and I've just started trialing these, and the idea is to be able to catch large numbers of juvenile crayfish, which again take out as many juveniles as possible, and that will affect the number of animals reaching adulthood and breeding. I'm also thinking about baiting ARTs. I agree completely with Stephanie, sardines in oil are the ways to go. And I'm just thinking about, well, if I can attach a tin of sardines with a hole in it to an ART, then the crayfish will come running and they'll think, oh, that's a nice place to live and it smells of fish, so I'll go in there. So yeah, ongoing research, which is great. Next slide, please.
Lovely, thank you, Nikki. We got 1 minute left.
That's fine, I don't need 1 minute. Thank you very much to all my volunteers, partners and funders. If you are interested in buying some ARTs, you can email me or you can look on my website, which has got more information on them and how they're used. And I think that's about it. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikki. That is brilliant and really interesting to, again, with a long-term study, it's really exciting to be able to kind of compare and contrast. And certainly I'm a great supporter, and without Nikki, I don't know what I'd do, because I have so many of your ARTs and we swear by them, especially when you have newly set up ARC sites, and it's a very nice refined way of being able to find crayfish relatively easily. And as Nikki said, we use it as a great technique when we're bringing in buried females to the hatchery, because it's a really gentle way of catching them and it ensures no egg loss. So a fabulous survey technique is the ART. So there's been quite a few nice things coming through to the chat. We will aim to get through and get back to you on anything that's coming through, some nice questions there. I would encourage any professionals to reply if you've got experience, rather than it just be a few of us replying on the chat, because there are some quite nice questions coming through. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nick Mott. He's the River Restoration Manager at Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. Nick has done a vast amount of work on ARC sites establishment and surveys within his area. He has a wealth of knowledge, again, been working on this for decades as a crayfish professional. And today, Nick is going to introduce our chapter 4 by talking about some of his experiences with ARC sites. So over to you, Nick. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jen. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Just tell me when it comes through, please.
Will do.
Can you see anything yet?
We can see your Zoom screen at the moment.
Let me try.
That's it. That's good from beginning. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Wrestling with technology. Yeah, so we've got 5-in-1 case studies here. I'll try and get through it in time. But just to say, I mean, we've been working for well over 10 years on doing ARC sites in Staffordshire and the Peak District and parts of lowland Derbyshire, and many partnership projects that we've been working with. So here's a few of the partners just showing in the corner there. I'll just have a quick run through of the importance of having decent donor sites, how we go about selecting the ARC sites themselves, a little bit on habitat enhancement, and then into the nitty-gritty of collection and the actual translocations. And if we've got time, we'll just finish up with a few remarks about natural ARC sites. But we're really lucky in this neck of the woods that we have, Cannock Chase especially, has some really good forest streams that has robust populations of white-clawed crayfish surviving. And there's this amazing picture that Paul Hobson's taken here of one in situ in one of these streams. And this is what they look like. I mean, they're largely unmanaged these days. If trees fall over, they're just kind of left. And you've got some really amazing habitats there for all sorts of species, and in particular, the white-claws. So I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but the right-hand picture showing lots of in-channel woody debris. We were recording up to about 20 to 40 per square meter in these habitats. So what we've been doing at these donor sites is actually up and downstream, just putting in loads and loads of wood in some of the barer reaches, just to try and bolster the populations. And a lot of it obviously happens during the winter. And we put in a superabundance of wood to try and encourage the formation of a superabundance of white-clawed crayfish. So it can look a little bit drastic at the time that we're doing the work, but it really does help. In terms of ARC site selection, I've just put a few thoughts down here. There's obviously a lot more detail in the manual about this. A couple of things to pick out. The accords with private landowners are particularly important. They're going to be custodians of a protected species, and obviously their ongoing management of those brooks and the riparian zones needs to be favourable to the white-clawed crayfish. And of course, it is courteous to talk to up and downstream landowners as well. If you are doing ARC sites, it's best to speak to people. You know, if they are going to spread, as we hope they will, it's good to have a subcatchment accord set up in advance of it happening. The other thing to pick out here is the prevalent threats. The main one we're obviously talking about is that if your ARC site can be as far as possible away from where there are non-indigenous crayfish, especially the American signal crayfish, that's great. And of course, it's those wet pathways for plague coming into those catchments, especially into the areas where you're hoping to put your ARC site. So it could be a case of speaking to high-risk operations like angling clubs. It could be you know, just talking to the farmers themselves, or to people that are regularly visiting those watercourses. Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious. And then when we are selecting the ARC sites, we start off with a very long list, and we soon whittle it down based on these prevalent threats to a short list. And then when we have the short list, we are then able to undertake a series of assessments to see if they really do make the grade for being, you know, top quality potential ARC sites. And here's a couple of examples up in the Peak District, where you've got, you know, wonderful limestone streams that are spring fed. We've got calcareous influences with these springs coming in. Often there's tufa forming in these streams as well. And the ones we're showing here, that they're largely unvisited, so they're very remote. Very few people can get in the very steep-sided valleys there. There might be 1 or 2 footpaths that are crossing, but they're normally crossing on footbridges, you know, above the channel themselves. So there's very little of, you know, people chucking dogs in, or people coming in and circling around in amongst the substrate, and that's ideal. So when we get to this stage, that triggers the assessments. So I would suggest that the main thing that we're interested in is actually the aquatic invertebrate assemblages that are in there, and by their presence or absence in the watercourse, you can tell an awful lot about what's going on there, the quality of the habitat, and whether it might be suitable for putting white claws in to reintroduce them. So we take them to species level, and then we run, with the results, we are able to run a series of metrics across the top. So it can give you ideas about potential stresses to the environment, silt burdens, nutrient loading that's going in, whether there's any problems with, say, flows. It can also do things like pesticide signatures as well. So what we're obviously after are the blue ones there with the traffic light system, and the unimpacted watercourse. Probably for white claws going in, it all needs to be ideally blue. What we also do is some chemical analysis through some water testing, and it's just to check that the known parameters, the suitable conditions for white claw crayfish are represented in the watercourse itself. It may be possible that you need to do extra surveys if say you're in quite an agricultural area. Things like metaldehyde tests would also be a recommendation to undertake as well. We also do fish surveys, just using these small backpack survey kits for headwater streams. We found at some of the arc sites that we put them in that when we've done lots of habitat work for crayfish and for try and boost the macroinvertebrates in the stream, we've also boosted the populations of brown trout. In this particular instance, where we've done some habitat work, we had breeding salmon turn up, which was a huge surprise in our part of the Peak District. But it's obviously good to know what you're up against in terms of species competition and potential predators in the watercourse. And then you're at the stage where you can then go and prep your arc site. Unless you've got these wonderful limestone streams that are sort of ready to go, in many cases there will be 1 or 2 years where you're actually prepping the site and getting it ready. And here's a wonderful example up in the Peak District through our most recent partnership project, the Southwest Peak Landscape Partnership. This particular landowner was very, very keen to engage anything he could do for wildlife on his particular holding. So we combined with a natural flood management project and prepped it for crayfish as well. So that's the main thing we did. You can see there with the watercourse is that we got a massive buffer strip in place. So 2 fields were fenced off. The whole of the riparian zone was sort of left undisturbed, and he did leave gates in so he can selectively come in and graze and manage those adjacent fields when he needs to. But the watercourse itself has regenerated beautifully. And then upstream in the woodland areas, we just put, again, a superabundance of wood into those areas. And then 2 years ago, we were able to put in the first lot of crayfish, which was almost 800 in the first batch. And then last year we reinforced with a further, I think it was 350, just to take it above 1,000 into that particular arc site. So that's a very positive result there. And just examples of at the arc site or downstream from the arc sites where we've been doing some habitat work to encourage crayfish to expand their range. Just a typical watercourse that's had the treatment. It's been resectioned, it's been deepened, and then subsequently alders have just grown along the banks, all uniform age. The idea there is just to break it up a little bit, chuck loads of dead wood into the watercourse, to chop and drop bankside alders and birch into the stream, to open up some light as well to get some of the macrophytes going. And in some cases, you can just about make out where Charlie at the background there is using a mini forestry forwarder to put in some root plate as well that we've imported from a nearby site. And there's those root plates going in. And that's just been fantastic. And the difference between the initial shot and what we have now is sensational. So it's good for crayfish. We're also seeing really good responses from things like brook lamprey and logjam hoverflies at this particular site. And then the in-channel wood, as it saturates down, many of you will have witnessed this, the crayfish actually burrow into and create galleries within this saturated wood. And it's often the case that females that have a cargo of eggs or of juveniles attached to her, she will often be in these very secure refuge sites within the saturated woody debris. In preparation for collecting at the ARC sites for getting ready for the translocations, a year in advance, we quite often put in these crayfish reefs. So this is showing the godlike importance of the engineering brick, perforated bricks. We pepper the stream with these bricks, quite often pairing them up. And then we shove in loads of branches and dead wood into there as well to create a gradient break within the stream. And then over the winter, you'll get that drift of leaves and twigs that will form a debris dam over the winter. And it just pulls in loads and loads of crayfish. And this is the same, not a great picture, there's a bit, that is the same accumulation just a year on. So underneath there, you've got the leaf pack and all the perforated bricks ready for collection. And then we quite ruthlessly go in there and disassemble the reef. And we were able to collect in excess sometimes of 400 crayfish from these reefs. So it saves stressing the animals out. It saves us having to go right the way through the watercourse and disturbing the whole the whole watercourse itself. And it makes it quite quick for collection. And that's what it looks like at the end of the day. We're able to rebuild the reef at the end and take the crayfish up to the ARC site. And there's one poking out from one of these engineering bricks. And just a few action shots of the collection. What the great thing about it is that it brings together loads of different, volunteers, Forestry England, Environment Agency, Peak District National Park ecologists, county council, rangers, etc., etc. And it's just, here's a few action shots of us getting nice and dirty and mucky and sweaty, collecting these crayfish up. You might just be able to make out as well in the background that we've used bracken bundles, which is a Maori technique that we've incorporated here in the UK. And that's a really good way, in addition to the reefs, of collecting crayfish quite quickly, ready for collection day. And we also found in this particular culvert that the crayfish are quite active during the day. So with head torches, we were quite quickly able to collect quite a few on the day, ready for the translocations. The crayfish themselves are then shuffled up, health checked. Any recent molts or ones that look a little bit unhealthy are not taken, but the rest of the healthy ones are divided up into these transit tanks and taken on their little journey to their new home. And this is
really sorry, Nick, just giving you a 3-minute warning.
I think we'll get there. Thank you. And this is the new home up in the Peak Districts. And you can see these 30-litre fish transit tanks that we put the crayfish in. The fact that you can cover them as well and aerate them on the journey, we found really, it settles the crayfish down and makes the journey more suitable for them. And that's it, just showing the crayfish going in. We tend to cluster them together at the new ARC site itself into good habitat. Quite often we'll have habitat already available for them, or even paired bricks that they can go into straight away to settle them down. And I just want to quickly make this point about, we're going to perhaps be discussing regional strategies later on for crayfish conservation. The one most important thing that we found in our area is to identify the natural ARC sites that you've got. There's an example here from the Needwood Forest in East Staffordshire, where we had a plague outbreak in 2013 that took out the lower catchment and the middle catchment for crayfish, but we had survivors up in the very extreme headwaters that are still there. So all we do really is just do checks with either torching survey or just going in and checking these paired bricks to make sure that the crayfish is still there and still healthy. And that's pretty much all we do, and just promote biosecurity for the area. So just a sort of final thought there on natural ARC sites. But yeah, thanks for that. If you've got any questions, please get in touch.
Thank you, Nick. And I think, yeah, there's a couple of things on the chat for you, question-wise. Thanks so much. It's brilliant. I absolutely love all of your rivers, and the enhancement that you do is great. I really love the dam building and then deconstructing. It's such a great way of not trampling through lots and lots of crayfish habitat. And I think, like you, it's been amazing just being so excited about engineered bricks and holes. They're such perfect habitat because they can hold on into them as well. So brilliant, thank you so much. And thanks so much to all of our speakers introducing the first 4 chapters of the book. You've been absolutely brilliant. We are running a little bit over time, but I'm aware that people might need a very lightning quick comfort break. So would it be all right if we start at 11:01, please, and listen to the other case studies of the other 3 chapters of the book? Is that okay, please? So if you come back just at 11, and we'll start again with the next section of this morning. Thanks very much, everybody. See you very, very soon.
Okay, hello everybody. We're at 1 minute past, so I just want to double check. Dorian, are you there, Dorian Latham?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I just put my headset on, I just realised. There we go, thank you. Hello there. So in terms of your presentation, Dorian, is that sat with us?
No, I can do it from my laptop.
Okay,
hopefully.
brilliant. Okay.
You know, I've got it set up, and it is quite a brief one, so hopefully that will claw back some of the time. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, we said to be back at 1 minute past. So yeah, I'll just give you a brief introduction, Dorian. So yeah, Dorian's someone I've had the pleasure of working with over the last few years. When I moved up to the northeast of the Environment Agency, he's the technical director for JBA Consulting, and he's got extensive ecological experience with crayfish and beyond and he's going to be covering chapter 5, which relates to mitigation all around Mitford Dam, which is on the Wansbeck up in Northumberland. So over to you, Dorian. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, it's my turn to struggle with these. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Well, hopefully that is the the front page. It certainly seems to be correct on my screen. Okay, so what I want to talk about is basically a case study that came from a flood project that was the Environment Agency implemented in the northeast. The market town of Northumberland, Mitford. Mitford had been sort of hit by very severe floods over a number of decades. The most recent one flooding well over 1,000 properties, which is like a significant proportion of the town. Took out the library, took out one of the health centres, took out a significant number of shops on the high street, flooded one of the only hotels in Mitford, and was quite a catastrophic event for the residents. Now, in order to try and prevent future flooding or reduce future flooding, a solution came forward where we looked at upstream storage on the River Wansbeck, which is a hugely important resource for white-clawed crayfish. And one of the the main design factors that we had for the dam was that the dam would have a minimum impact on the crayfish populations, and also maintain the geomorphological status of the watercourse, which is hugely important in terms of maintaining the habitat. So I'm not going to talk too much about the the engineering detail of the dam, although I'm happy to field questions. I really want to talk about what we had to go through in order to essentially prepare the area where the dam would be constructed, because it was an online structure, and also look at what we had to do at the sort of the tail end of the in-channel works, where we had to put the river back through the new dam.
Dorian, sorry to interrupt. I think we're stuck on kind of a preview. We can see the first slide, but then the kind of the preview slides on the left, which does kind of work. But
yeah. So what?
Okay, yeah, we can see that can work, I think.
They should be on my second slide now. Display settings. Hold on. So what have people done in the past? Because it should.
So if you go into the share screen options, you should now have an option for one screen that just shows that. Also, I did this at the beginning.
Yeah, this is what I'm seeing on my screen. I don't quite understand what the difference is between what you're seeing and what I'm seeing. Okay, all right. Oh God, so where's the okay, share screen. Well, I've only got one option for a share screen, which I'm sharing. Maybe if I go into
yeah, if you click play from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then try looking at the share screening options once that's open, possibly.
Oh, right. Okay, it's not much more difficult than. Can we just do it as it is? Because it's just pain to be honest.
Yeah, that's fine.
Fine to roll with it.
Okay, all right. Okay. Right. Okay. I mean, there's only a small number of slides. Okay. So.
Fine. That's perfect.
Okay, so I mean, all the study was written up, and it was published in a SciWem publication several years ago now. So we can go back to that and provides all the detail of the study and all the background information to the scheme itself. This is essentially the completed constructed dam. It had a whole series of culverts. Now these help to regulate the flows. The culverts on the left-hand side of the channel. These were the invert of these is actually lower than the other culverts, and that made sure that we maintained a low flow route through the dam even during low waters. The large culverts were 3 meters by 3 meters, and one that we called the Crayfish culvert was 1.8 by 1.8. Whilst the large culverts were used for flood risk management, the Crayfish culvert was specifically designed to ensure some movement of the crayfish through the structure. I think the structure was about 60 meters long. And within the crayfish culvert, we had a series of baffles, we had a roughened base, and through culvert number 1, we had a low flow channel, and we actually installed sort of crayfish refuges that were constructed out of like a big sort of wedge of wood, and they were sort of embedded into the channel, and they allowed they had holes in the sort of the high face of the wedge, and again with the principle that these could be used for shelter and perhaps even used for refuge within the holes that were drilled. Just to show you the actual temporary works that were involved in installing the online structure. This is the dam structure that you can see. It was an online structure because we wanted to try and, as far as possible, to maintain the geomorphological plan form of the river. And then during the construction of that feature, we had to dewater this area. It's about 100 meters, and construct the what was called the temporary channel, which is about 300 meters. And during the year for construction of the dam, the Wansbeck was diverted through the the temporary structure. Now, the works we needed to do in order to essentially make sure that the area was free from crayfish, and to mitigate the impact, is that we carried out a whole series of different sort of searches and trapping sort of methods. Essentially, these are all, as people have shown on previous photographs, these were very sort of heavy based on people. We had the fish rescue first, and then after the fish rescue, we then started to manipulate the the water level within the stanked off section of the Wansbeck. And very laboriously, we had individuals who would scour the area, look under rocks, and we put in these straw bales. These were essentially used there for trying to manage silt. But we did find them to be incredibly sort of useful in terms of filtering out the crayfish. One of the interesting things is obviously this is a natural water course. There's lots of sort of pools within the bed, And we did find that the crayfish would retreat to these pools as we started dewatering areas. The period of translocation was over. 3 weeks where we had people on site. During the during daylight. We did think about looking at what we could do during the evenings, but unfortunately, this is a construction site, and the contractor that we were working with was very unhappy about the prospects of that, and so we were restricted to working when they regarded that it was safe to work on an active construction site. What we did find that unfortunately, when we came back early in the morning, there was clear evidence that the local otter had moved through the areas that were being dewatered, and really had a jolly time, like a McDonald's drive-through, filling his tummy full of the crayfish. We kept on expecting that we'd find like a walrus-sized otter hiding behind one of the larger rocks, but he cleverly disguised himself. But what was really sort of interesting is the vast number of animals that we found. We found well over 3,500 crayfish just in that section of the watercourse that we dewatered. We grouped all these crayfish again, as people have said, making sure that animals that were didn't look too well or were molting were actually separated from the other animals. We couldn't re-release those in the areas that we were going to be worked, because they obviously would be this is going to be a dry construction area for next year. So we looked at breaking them up into batches of 50, and then we released them at previously selected areas up to about 15 kilometers, from the working area. We set a sort of a sort of initial limit of 3 kilometers from the working area as the starting point for the release areas. They were all released upstream, and we mainly made that decision on the basis that going downstream, we were moving to much more an urban area and much more disturbed watercourse. And just in case if there were any incidents in terms of silt from the construction site, they were unlikely to be sort of impacted if we were going to move them upstream. So all upstream and released into these batches of 50 along 100-meter sections of the watercourse. And that was my job and a colleague's job at the end of the day, to try and release these animals. And we were working into quite late periods to get those done. Just a quick sort of illustration of the catch detail. I think I measured about 1,500 of the animals that came through. It shows a reasonably sort of bell-shaped presentation. So I suppose in my sort of mind, that perhaps illustrates that it was a reasonable sort of catch methodology that we'd use to try and remove them. Now, of course, a year later, what we had to do is we had to move the watercourse back through the dam and restore the system. So we had to start the process all over again. We broke down the temporary channel into sections. We had teams of people who were going through the material that we lined the temporary channel with. One of the initial sort of views that we had is we were thinking, well, we wanted to try and, I suppose, reduce the impact of this second stage. And so initially we had thoughts that, okay, well, we wouldn't line the temporary channel, but it just didn't work. I mean, it's very clayey sort of county Northumberland. And when we put the first sort of water through the unlined channel, it was just like drinking chocolate. So we had to sort of quickly cancel that view within hours, really. And so we went back, we lined the base of the channel with a geotextile, and then imported clean material that would line the temporary channel. The impact of that was to actually create a fantastic resource for crayfish to colonize in. Again, the process.
Sorry, Dorian, just to give you a 2-minute warning.
Okay, yeah. Okay, this is just a comparison of the of the natural bed material on the left and the material that we placed along the temporary channel. It was obviously, but it was bigger stuff in the temporary channel, and the numbers that we brought in were high. I mean, I think we pulled out over 5,000, 6,000 crayfish in the temporary channel. Now that's good because it sort of illustrated that we created a habitat, but I think it would only have been a temporary sort of suitability. And I think there is a high risk with such a homogeneous sort of a larger sort of cobble size that this would be silted up. But it wasn't intended as a permanent sort of channel. Just a comparison between the catch statistics. We caught more, obviously, in the temporary channel, but it was longer. There was no statistical difference in terms of the male and female ratios. No difference really in the size. What perhaps was quite interesting is, as I recall, let's go back and just check what I was going to say. There was a sort of a shortage of the middle order crayfish in the temporary channel. This could be that that they just hadn't grown into that habitat. But that was the only real sort of difference between the two. We did find the job of actually removing the crayfish from the temporary channel was much harder because they tended to wedge themselves in the geotextile, and obviously the geotextile had been there for a year and all of a sudden was incredibly heavy. And so we had to get the machine to help us lift that material. Just some basic observations. It was a fantastic opportunity to look at dewatering and the ecology of crayfish at the Wansbeck. There were huge numbers of animals found. Much higher densities than we were predicting from just the hand searches that were done previously. It clearly underlines the importance of bed material for the animals. That's obviously taken. The temporary channel, as I said, did provide suitable habitat. Obviously, that was gave us a challenge when we were closing that down. But as I said, I think the suitability would have rapidly sort of declined as perhaps the area was silted up. It was never intended to be a replacement channel, and if you look at the design, it was straight, so therefore quite potentially susceptible to silt accumulation on those on the material that was imported. One of the things that I was just discussing with one of the people who helped us in the work, he felt that perhaps some of the statistics that we were reporting could be due to the fact that a new habitat, your sort of interaction between the animals and the fact of animals eating one another was perhaps lower in the temporary channel than in the natural channel, but we don't really have any sort of evidence apart from anecdotal information to support that. Okay, that's me. Any I'm not sure if any questions would come up. Just have a look.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Dorian. A truly mammoth drawdown and rescue operation there. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah.
If people have questions, just pop them in the chat, Dorian. And if you've got time, if you could respond, that I'd really appreciate that. Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so next up, we're moving on to chapter 6, which is white claw crayfish captive breeding. And we've got a presentation from Ollie Brown, who's from Natural Resources Wales and runs the Welsh hatchery. He's got over 10 years experience in captive breeding, and he's restored many white claw crayfish populations in his area as well. So Ollie, if you want to come online and get your presentation, we'll try get you sorted.
Morning all. I'll just try and share my screen. How's that looking?
Brilliant. Working fine, Ollie. Thank you.
Lovely job. Cheers, Ian. Just a couple of apologies first. Firstly, my internet connection is horrific, so we'll see how we get on with that. And secondly, I'm starting a salmon smolt tracking project tonight, so I've got to dive out shortly after this and get the last sets of acoustic receivers in the river, so I won't be able to make the workshop. But I think Jen said we're recording that, so that's good. Right, I've got a huge amount of time, but I'll give you a brief overview of what my role entails. And if you've got any questions, either give me a shout. And also, Jen's done a brilliant job in the handbook, really comprehensive view of captive rearing and breeding. So have a look at that. Okay, so a bit of background. This was true. These facts, they were true over a decade ago, and they're still true now. The brilliant thing about aquaculture is it really gives you the ability to have large numbers of disease-free crayfish on pretty much on tap, which is great for certain situations. Just in one production cycle, I can go and shut down a system and net out 1,000 odd 1+ or 2+ crayfish, and they'll be ready to go to a new home in 30 minutes or so. So it's really nice to have that extra string to your bow. I've also seen ourselves and from wider Europe, it's getting more and more difficult to source wild donor stock. So especially for the future, this is something that's probably here to stay. Just to give you an idea of what's happening in Wales, it's mirrored in the rest of Europe and the UK. It's not brilliant. To put it in perspective, there's probably five or six donor streams which I regularly collect breed stock from, and that's about it. They're the only real viable streams which are open to me. And it's getting worse. I can go to a stream one year, pick out a dozen buried females, an abundance of pretty much every life stage of crayfish. Then you can go back the following year expecting to do the same, and you've lost pretty much everything. Probable perceived pollution incident, and it's not just the fact it's having a negative impact on our rearing program. It's also, if you think about the wider ecological impacts of the site. To lose that sort of biomass of crayfish in a few months has got to have serious implications for the sites. Now, we do things slightly different to Jen. For at least at the moment, we're in the privileged position where we can collect broodstock on an annual basis. At the moment, there isn't really the need to captive breed. So mostly we just rear. I have done some trials with captive breeding, but for the moment at least, we're available, the broodstock available for us to collect. And it's not just that; it's also the a trade-off with space. So rather than have a system or two systems dedicated to breeding, I can dedicate those again to rearing, which just increases our production capacity. So generally, I'll be out collecting in April, and that'd be pretty much all by stone turning. On an average production year, I'll take up to 30 varied females. At the moment, the last few years, I can normally do that in around about 3 mornings. So I can go out, set time aside depending on the flows, and I'll take our broodstock allocation for that year. The way I'll do it, the broodstock, they'll all be transported in insulated polystyrene boxes. I'll use these tubs you can see in the bottom right side of the picture there. Generally use a synthetic substrate, normally well, not so much hessian, but you can use netting, anything, just to give a bit of stability to the crayfish when she's in the box. You imagine if that wasn't in, they should be washing against the sides, which can potentially lead to egg loss. Hessian seems to work pretty well. I'd have a lid on that with holes in it. And what I normally do, I'll take maybe half a dozen of those tubs, walk up the river corridor. Every time I found a crayfish, I'd put her in the tub, put that tub back in the stream in a shaded spot with a rock on the top. Once I've used my 6, I can then go back, pick those up back into the insulated boxes, and away they go back to the hatchery. The major thing to be aware of is thermal shock. You want to make sure that the crayfish they're kept at that stable temperature. They'll all be transported individually. I will occasionally use ice packs if it's particularly hot. I prefer not to, because that can drop the temperature a bit much. So when you get back to the hatchery, you're then spending time raising that temperature back up. You don't want any sudden changes. Probably 2 degrees, maybe 3 degrees is the limit, but I always try and get it pretty much bang on once you're transferring animals from one water to another. This is the fate of the first female I collected back in, I think it was 2008. At the time, there wasn't a huge amount of data available on captive rearing. I think I was reading a lot of sort of Rhodes and other authors at the time, and they were talking a lot about artificial incubation of the eggs themselves. So the first female I had, I stripped the eggs with a blunt pair of forceps. That was no issue. The female was fine afterwards, and we can maintain that female, then return her back to point of capture. I put the eggs in this upwelling incubator, and had 90% plus survival, which I was quite shocked at a first go. This is just on a standard research system. And again, it was sort of subsequent post-hatch, first feeding. It was all trial and error. I was using stuff similar to lobster rearing, so individual containers. I think I tried 3 different feeding regimes, and we had some success. But again, it's all a learning curve, really. So it was an experience. But now it's all maternal brooding. We just let the females get on with it. So once I've collected the females, I take those back to the hatchery, slowly introduce the animals back into our brooding tanks, checking the temperature all the time. Substrate wise, generally a mix of whatever I've got to hand, really. Generally pipe work, 2 inch down to 1 inch, whatever's left over. So T's, 90s, anything to hand. As you can see, they tend to favour the pipes which on the refuges which suit their body size. And the other substrate in there, you can see that's biobun. That's used as a salmonid rearing substrate. So post eggs hatching, the alevins would then swim amongst the biobun, and that provide a refuge for the alevins whilst they're using up the yolk sacs. And it works really well for crayfish as well. You can rear crayfish from 0+ up to sort of post 1+ in that with no problem. So I'll generally have the pipes in the brooding tanks with the substrate, the biobun over the top. You can see the female up in the top left-hand corner. She's pretty close to hatch. Those eggs, they develop that sort of two-tone coloration just where the carapace becomes visible. So you know she's pretty much nearly ready to go. We maintain the females, feed pretty sparingly. They don't eat a huge amount. They'll actually stop feeding when they begin brooding post hatch, when they're brooding the juveniles. So it's worth keeping an eye on that. We check the tanks pretty regularly. Once the females have hatched the eggs, the juveniles, then they'll stay around the female for quite a while. This is probably late May, even early June sometimes. So once she's finished maternally brooding, I'll then take the females back out of the tanks. They'll be collected and held in holding tanks, and they'll be returned to point of capture. Again, really careful with the temperatures. We use all research. The major reasons behind that are firstly biosecurity. We could use an ambient feed, but you've got to remember that if you had some bright spark upstream of us which had a pond and decided to put some signal crayfish in, that'd be game over. Similarly, anyone walking through, fishermen, otters. So the research systems, they just give us a lot more controllability over the systems regarding water quality, temperature, and that peace of mind with your biosecurity. So we've got the 4 systems there. Each of those is in an individual unit, so we can rear from up to 4 streams or 4 catchments at any one time. And it's quite a small volume. You've got 7 cube of water there, which does help with the system stability for water quality, maintaining temperature. But the major thing is the culture area, the actual bed of your tanks. So we've got nearly 30 square meters there, and that's pretty key. All our systems are borehole fed. The water quality is good pH, good oxygen. So it's nice to be able to have that facility. That's a closer view of the substrate there. You can see the biobun on the left. Initially, I did try sort of semi-natural rearing systems with gravel, which intuitively you'd expect to be better for the crayfish and possibly for survival. You can see the middle picture there. That's probably a large 0+ with a molt next to it, and you've got just post 1+ on the top left. What we found was there was no difference in survival, and the beauty of the synthetic substrate is you can keep it really clean. When you're on growing, you can get in there and siphon all the waste out. Well, you imagine trying to keep the semi-natural substrate and the tanks clean. It's not easy. And then as the juvenile crayfish grow, you can see will change substrate size. Post 1+, we'll start introducing pipe work and other bits and pieces just to provide different refuges. Generally use 2 different methods. You can see in the top picture, that's a system I built a couple of years ago. That's a fully insulated unit with the trough system, and you've got a schematic of it on the bottom left there. And the bottom right is one of the early tank systems I produced with a mix of 1.5 and 1 meter circular tanks, which are fine, but you've got a lot of water volume which you don't really need, and it's a lot easier to work on the troughs than it is on the tanks because everything is at waist height. If you're grading or sorting or just general maintenance, daily siphoning, that sort of thing, the troughs make it really easy. We don't tend to bother with a mechanical particulate filter, like a drum filter, but most of the waste is contained in the troughs. So with daily siphoning, that's no issue. Just got a big biofilter because they do produce quite a lot of waste. Big UV is pretty simple, you know. What I would say is you definitely need a backup chiller. So if you do get a chiller failure, again, if you don't want a chiller failure because you're going to get temperature spikes even with the insulated building. So if you get chiller failure, you can just swap over the connections and your chiller's back online. And similarly, a spare pump ready to go next to your pump tank. All our systems are alarmed with float switches, so if we do get a pump failure or a terminal power cut, the backup generator fails, whatever, we'll get a text and a phone call through, so we know to be able to attend site. But yeah, keep your spare pump next to your tank, because it's nothing worse than in the middle of the night trying to find another pump to get your system running again. It's not the end of the world, especially in cooler conditions. You could leave it overnight, but it's best to attend promptly.
Hi Oliver, really sorry, just giving you a 2-minute warning.
Right, okay. Diet, slightly different again to Jen. We don't enrich the Artemia. It doesn't seem to be a huge issue, generally between sort of 75 and 90% survival. Then as the crayfish grow, we'll increase the particulate size of the frozen zooplankton. So this is stuff you get pick up from your general aquarium supplies, your Cyclops first, then Daphne a bit bigger. Bloodworm comes in a varying size from minis to large, so you can just vary to suit. The veg diet is pretty critical. As you know, the crayfish, they can't synthesize the carotenoids, so I tend to add about 8 grams of the Nature Rose, the Haemuscoscus algae to my veg diet. I'll make that up in batches, which is kale, carrot, sweet potato, parboil it, blend it down in a conventional blender with the algae. And again, particulate size will depend on the life stage you're feeding. Then freeze that down and bring it up as and when you need it. Just to give you an idea of the biobun, these are 0+ crayfish. You can see there, you do get some sort of bit of waste under the mats, but it's pretty good, and they're fine under there. It's brilliant as well when you're netting the tanks out. You can just get out all of your biobun and just run a net through, and you can clean out the tanks in minutes. Problems, the only real one we've had is Hydra. These tend to proliferate if you're feeding too much Artemia. You tend to get a bit of hemorrhaging on the juvenile crayfish at first feeding, 0+ stage. And if you don't get on top of it, I've had sort of between 40 and 60% mortality. Initially, I thought it was potentially other bacterial diseases, but when I've looked closely, I've seen these guys under the microscope move the crayfish from the essentially dirty tank into a clean tank, and mortality is stopped pretty much straight away. And again, biosecurity, that's a biggie for us. Each of the units has got a foot dip at the entrance, hand gel, disposable gloves ready to go. So just be really on top of your biosecurity, because if you get a plague on site, that's everything wiped out. This was my last release I did back in the autumn 2021. This on the headwaters of the Hondi, a monotrib on the Welsh Marches. Right at the top, these were predominantly 2+ and 3+. You can see again the insulated boxes there, and the other boxes ready for just equalising the temperatures. And just because it's nice, I will show you a video of the release. This is all predominantly sandstone with a bit of limestone mixed in. Really good substrate and great water quality, and no one goes up there as well, so it's a really good site. So we'll be revisiting this over the next few years, just to see how these guys are getting on. And that is about me.
Brilliant, thank you, Oliver. That was great. It was good to have a view into the world of crayfish hatchery. It's something a lot of people will never get to see. So thank you so much for that.
No
So moving on now, we've got Matthew Fitch. Matthew Fitch is a ranger for the National Trust up at the Wallington Estate up in Northumberland. And he's going to be talking about communication and outreach, which is chapter 7 in the book. Matt, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you. Yeah, somebody should be sorting you out with access rights and whatnot for sharing your screen, I think.
Let's see if I can. Yeah, I can't. It's I can't get it. Oh, there we go. Got it. Right, can you see my screen?
Yep, can see the preview and everything. Yep.
You can see so you can't see like the full page. It's weird.
No, not yet. No.
Because mine is set as that.
Right. That'll probably work though, Matt. It's pretty big on the screen, to be honest.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So, hi, I'm Matt. I'm from the National Trust up at Wallington. So I'll give you a little bit of background to what we've done, and then I'll go on and talk about the communication work that we're doing. So just so people know where we are, we're in the northeast of England, just sort of 20 minutes, half an hour north of Newcastle, and we're a really large estate. We've got 20 square miles of estate that range from the headland uplands up in the Harwood Forest right down to the River Wansbeck. Wansbeck was mentioned before. Really great river for white-clawed crayfish. We've got great populations, no records of signals, no plague, and the estate here, we've got 54 kilometres of the headlands for the Wansbeck, and we've actually got a 3 kilometre stretch of the Wansbeck that runs through the estate as well. We've also got a big house, gardens, grounds, 250,000 visitors a year, 14 tenant farmers, 70 properties on the estate, a large forest that's looked after by the Forestry Commission. So there's lots going on, but it's a real opportunity to actually do some landscape scale conservation work, all within one succinct property. So yeah, we're the largest continual landmass that the National Trust owns. I started 4 years ago here, and one of the first things that I was tasked with was how can we best look after the white-clawed crayfish that live on Wallington Estate. We've had
Matt, sorry to interrupt. I can't. The slides aren't changing for us at the minute.
No.
Yeah.
Any joy? What are you seeing?
I think we're seeing the preview that'll be on your desktop. That's moved it on there, I think. Yeah.
I'm not getting a preview. Right. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yep.
Right, I'll just leave it like that because that's not showing us full screen on mine. But is this flicking through slides now?
Yeah, that's moving.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I'll quickly go back if you didn't see them. That's where we are. That's the estate in the green outline, and the watercourses across the estate. So yeah, we looked at how we can best look after the white-clawed crayfish that live on the estate. And historically, we had a lot of information, a lot of it anecdotal, some sporadic monitoring that had taken place. And we knew, obviously, that they were here. But the first thing that we wanted to do was to sort of get a better handle on exactly where they were. So we started partaking in quite a lot of surveying, using artificial refuge traps in the main, mainly just doing presence and absence surveys, getting out onto our watercourses and trying to find out exactly where they were located. This gives you a bit of a picture of the map of the estate, and the upshot of all that surveying was they're pretty much everywhere in every watercourse that we've got. Their densities changed drastically with the water quality, but we've got peaty streams up in the top of the estate that I found them in, right down through little ditches that they're in. Just a couple of places that we've surveyed that we didn't find them. So we started to look at, well, what can we actually do about that? How can we look after them best? What's the best thing that we can do? So we started making habitat improvements. So as part of ongoing works on streams to reduce siltation to rivers. So there's some small scale works like this of just doing some willow spiraling, stopping that bank eroding, right through to larger scale projects, working with our tenant farmers, stopping reducing cattle movements into streams, fencing off and woodying up areas. And then most recently, we've just established our first arc site and just moved crayfish to that arc site a couple of weeks ago. But what we realized pretty quickly, and I've stolen this from the book because it's something that if we'd sort of figured out from the beginning, would have been handy, that they wrote, underpinning any crayfish conservation program should be an effective communication outreach strategy to ensure that the efficiency and long-term sustainability of the project is maximized. And this should reach as widespread an audience as possible. So what we realized pretty quickly was that we are in a pretty unique position. We've got a big estate that lots of people come to, and we're in a real good place to start talking to them about crayfish. So we looked at how we could do this. So to start with, we looked at tagging on crayfish engagement activities to other things that we were doing. So we did a duck race on site, and we invited the Environment Agency to come along. So Ian came, some of his colleagues, and while 300 families came and thought they were just coming for a fun duck race, they actually learned all about crayfish conservation, the need for biosecurity, and looking after the crayfish. We then moved on to, well, our surveying. We set up a permanent monitoring area. So down on the high use area on the Wansbeck, we've started monitoring every year. We've specifically chosen that point to do it as an engagement tool. So we've, every time we go in, we're now starting to advertise that we'll be down there surveying. You get a nice day. We're getting hundreds of our visitors come along, and we're using that as an opportunity to talk to people, explain the biosecurity message, explain the crayfish, explain what we're doing. And I think out of everything that we've done, this is definitely the best thing that we've done. It really gets people to sort of see a crayfish, get lots of people that didn't even know they existed. We can really talk to children and really get across the message that actually this is a species that everybody can do something to help, and it's not difficult. You know, the check, clean, dry message is something that we're really keen on promoting, and we're getting a really positive response from that. We also have red squirrels here, and a lot of people can equate red squirrels and the need for the conservation, but not so many of them know about crayfish. So it's a really simple and sort of overlaying story with the squirrels, but we just need to have better PR for the crayfish. So that's what we're trying to do. We actually ran a training event for some people down on at the monitoring station, and we were getting so many members of public come along and ask about what we were doing that I had to draft in an extra member of staff to come and give those talks, just to allow me to actually be able to deliver the training, because I was just getting stop-start all the time. We're then we've been looking at our messaging that we're putting out, and trying to make sure everything is consistent and easy, and giving people the information that they need to help look after the species as well. We've then used media. So we're really trying to put the message out there. We've changed all of our websites Got really positive feedback on that. We've used Twitter and Facebook to promote our activities, to tell people about the conservation work we've been doing, but also advertise that people can come along and find out about these things. We've also stuck to more traditional media, and as the trust, we're in a fairly privileged position that you know, we have access to these channels, and so we've really tried to use that. So we this is some of the media that we got from coverage we got from our ARC site remove translocation the other day, and really great to see the message being put out there. The thing that I'd say with the media and that I'm learning is being really specific about what you're actually wanting to go out, because you can write press releases and then the media just pick and choose which bits of the press releases they go. It's not always exactly what you want, but I guess it goes back to no publicity is bad publicity. Really getting the conservation message out has been great, and it's actually been taken on really well. We're then trying to include as many people as we can and as many local conservation organisations into this work. So with our ARC site the other day, we had 8 local conservation bodies came along to help with the translocation. So rather than just keeping this in-house, we're just like trying to get everybody as involved as we possibly can. We've then brought crayfish to Wallington. So we looked at how we can get people to see these wonderful creatures, and rather than getting them to go out and disturb them in the wild or trying to minimize that as much as possible, I went down to Bristol and Jen kindly gave us some crayfish, and they've been in a tank and we've been looking after them for a couple of years now, learning all about what to do and what happens when the electricity goes off and all those things. And then we got massively delayed by COVID, but just a few weeks ago, they went into our visitor welcome building. This has been a really great success. Kids are coming in, loving seeing them. We're giving presentations and talks. It's been a real positive thing to have to show people crayfish. And then what we also decided that we really needed to tap into was the trust. We employ about 10,000 people, and I think sometimes we forget that there is those internal sources that we can communicate with as well. So we've really tried to hammer home to our staff and our volunteers about the crayfish conservation message here at Wallington, passing on Check Clean Dry, getting people interested and involved. We're also working with a whole heap of other partners in a crayfish conservation partnership, and we've also tried to get all of those partners to come and help when appropriate. So we've opened up our surveying to people. As I said, the ARC site removal was all done with our partners as well. So yeah, I mean, it's been a real learning curve. We've had some real great wins with hundreds of people arriving and coming and learning about crayfish and really getting inspired to help look after them in the future. So I think from our point of view, all the works that we're doing in terms of physical improvements and things are great, and we'll continue to do so. But I think the most important thing that we've found that we can probably do to add to this crayfish conservation is to shout about them as much as possible. Yeah, that's me.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. And I think it was just absolutely tremendous the work you've done up there. And I think kind of the turnaround, you know, in time from, you know, these ideas being talked about and then to them actually being delivered has just been so quick. And the quality of the work you've done up there, and you know, everything from the surveying to the habitat work to the engagement has just been absolutely fantastic. So yeah, it's just brilliant stuff.
Cheers. If anyone's in the northeast and they want to come and meet some crayfish, just get in touch. Anyone's always welcome.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. If you're hanging around, if anyone's got any questions for Matt, just put them in the chat. If you have to dash off, Matt, you can answer them later. We'll make sure that happens.
No, I'm here for a while.
Oh, great. Okay, so we are running a little bit behind time, quite a bit behind time, but there's been a lot of interesting stuff. So I suggest we have a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for the workshop. We'll be really interested to have people's input on that. We're going to be talking about kind of how we can help the species in the future, work on a regional and national level. So if I could ask for people to come back at, say, 3 or 4 minutes past, ready for kickoff at 5 past, that'd be fantastic. Okay, thank you. See you soon.
So, can everyone hear me? Firstly, I'm hoping everyone's back from their break. Great stuff. Well, welcome back, everyone. My name is Rupert Houghton, and I'm going to be chairing the workshop section of this. I work for APEM under Paul Stebbing as part of the invasive non-native species team at APEM, and he sent his apologies. I'm kind of filling in for him, and I'll try my best to sort of fill his boots in sharing this. Just a bit of background about me. I am an invasive species biologist in general, but my background is really in research to do with invasive crayfish. My PhD was a bit like Nikki. It was quite focused on management methods for signal crayfish and some of the more kind of fundamental aspects of signal crayfish ecology. And I was kind of focusing quite heavily on like theoretical population modeling work to try and simulate different management strategies and looking at some of the dynamics like cannibalism and density dependence and things like that. So the purpose of this workshop segment is to really kind of get baseline views on crayfish management in the UK, and to give an opportunity for people to share best practice, give updates on what people are doing around the country, and hopefully to try and sort of create a bit of a network for people to use to get guidance and link up with other people working in the field to try and help conserve whiteclaw crayfish. This just to remind you, this is all recorded, and the kind of key thing here is we're going to be sharing stuff. So if what we'll do is we're going to run through some slides that have got questions, and you should be able to contribute your answers as we go through. And so it is anonymous, I understand, but it'd be really great if when you're making your contributions, if you can leave information about either who you are or what organization you work for, just because it will help us to track all of your answers and help kind of present this baseline information of people's attitudes towards crayfish management. I'm hoping that everyone will be comfortable sort of having their contact details, so that in the future we'll all know who to contact and about certain things or certain places. And yeah, I think I'm hoping this is going to be a network of local action group volunteers, government workers, strategists, everyone, researchers, and that we can all really kind of gel our ideas together on this. The workshop is going to cover 4 main areas, and we've obviously touched on a lot of them throughout the amazing talks we've had this morning from all the book contributors. Some really interesting stuff, and I've enjoyed being able to just tune in and hear all of this great work. The questions are going to come in 2 different forms. They kind of note text contribution. So it would be really great if you can include details like where you're operating, names of places, names of methods, as much information as you can really. And there'll also be a kind of multiple choice polling question it's probably just going to be a yes or no sort of response. And it would also be really great as we go through and answers start, they should be live emerging on the screen in front of our eyes. So I might try and pick out a few of these, and if perhaps we can sort of have a bit of discussion around them. And if any of the contributors to today's talks want to sort of pitch in at a relevant time, then please feel free. It's all going to be quite open, and you'll hear my voice droning on a little bit, but yeah, hopefully we'll kind of all be able to have a conversation together.
Rupert, just to say, I've put the link into the chat.
Ah, good. So are we ready to start the process?
Next slide, please, Karen.
Okay, so this is our first of the 4 kind of themes that we want to be talking about, and that's specifically to do with white claw crayfish and priority actions nationally and regionally, locally. So, what are you currently doing in your region in relation to white claw crayfish conservation? And obviously, these can cover all of the things that we spoke about this morning. But if there are other novel things that you're doing, it'd be really very useful to hear. So whether that's survey monitoring or habitat enhancement, like Nick was talking about, if you're involved in any of the ARC site selection processes or captive breeding programs, it'd be really interesting to know what you're doing. I myself am involved mostly on the management side of things for signal crayfish, but we also have a few ongoing white claw crayfish projects. Okay, well, we've got lots of stuff coming in. Okay, it's about managing to survey 1 of 6 populations in Cheshire. Not had any success in finding an ARC site. Okay, so we've got some contributions coming in from Cheshire. Wow, okay, this is working really well. Okay, survey monitoring mainly, ensuring that work does not negatively impact. So that's about, and we're going to come on to biosecurity later, but it's good to see there are a few answers coming up here that are mentioning biosecurity as part of it. And awareness raising is included within that as well. So Ben Rushbrook's obviously contributed. He's involved in all stages of white claw crayfish priorities. Okay, what else have we got here?
Just to say to people, if you can put in who you are, so that we can link it up on the spreadsheets, that we can sort of collate who's doing what where. That would be really useful, or just stick something in the chat. Sorry, Rupert.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's your initials, but yeah, names and organizations would be really great. So there's ARC site project on the River Creedy, and that's also with Nikki Green, who we've heard from today. Detection dogs. That's a really interesting one. Who contributed that? It would be if you feel comfortable, it'd be really great to hear from you and maybe expand on that a little bit. You can just unmute if you'd like to. You don't, no pressure. Okay, never mind. It's okay. You don't need to. Maybe someone. So ARC site selection, biosecurity, awareness raising. would you be able to sort of expand on where that's going on, and what do you do to raise awareness on biosecurity? Okay. I don't know if there's issues with people being able to unmute, but obviously biosecurity and awareness raising is a very fundamental part of, I think, pretty much any of the stuff that we're talking about here today. So
I
it
think
should almost
some
be...
people are responding in the chat, Rupert.
Oh, right, okay. Is it within the...
It'd be good to hear from Katie, Rupert. I don't know. I can unmute you, Katie, if you're happy to speak. I think that'd be a really interesting one to hear about. Yeah, you are unmuted, I think.
Excellent. Cool. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, so there's two of us actually here. I've also got Lucy Wild, who put in the chat earlier about detection dogs as well. So yeah, we're both members of the detection dog working group, and both of us have dogs that are currently in training or actually trained, ready to do kind of conservation and ecology work. I work with Geckoella. We're based in the southwest of England, and actually me and Kate have been having quite a few conversations lately because yeah, we're hoping to be involved a bit more in invasive species as well, and using detection dogs for that. Obviously, crayfish are just one of the areas, so I'm here really today to learn a little bit more about what everyone else is getting on and how we can kind of work with everyone else as well. I'm here as well. Yep. Hi, Lucy.
Hi,
Lucy. Do you want to chat about because you're doing a master's research as well, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to base my project around finding signal crayfish and comparing it to the current hand searching method, just to show that hopefully, if it all works, that the dogs will be able to pinpoint a lot better. I'm currently jumping this in between. I'm currently helping train future handlers as well, so I'm just stood to one side. So I've got a 2-year-old cocker. She's in training at the minute, and we're hoping to have her ready by the end of April to get ready to imprint. But also working underneath Kate as well with Geckoella and the Seeker group, just to well, get underway with it really. So if anyone's interested, that'd be great to know.
That sounds like a really interesting piece of research. I can imagine the advantages in terms of how rapidly you'd be able to assess sites being amazing, and not having to go through trapping or manual searching. So I'd be very interested to hear on the results from that.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll come back home with some answers and things like that. The other thing is that dogs will be able to pinpoint a much smaller sample size than a human. So that's going to be a key thing, hopefully, for on a side for the dogs. They might be able to find something much smaller, much more detailed, and more underwater than we can, much faster anyway. But yeah, we'll carry on with our research, and hopefully we can update everyone later on.
Katie, there's just a quick question from Stephanie PA here saying, how well can detection dogs detect crayfish underwater? I've had some experience with detection dogs with finding cadavers, so yeah. I'm guessing it's a similar thing where the gases are released or something similar.
It'll be a slightly different thing. So the scent of the crayfish itself will have a slightly different smell to cadavers or whatever. And at the moment, I mean, dogs can identify aquatic and invasive species around the world in quite deep waters in some cases. So yeah, we'll be carrying out and seeing how far down the dogs can actually scent up to.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. I would be fascinated to talk for longer about that, but if we could move on to the next question. So what additional priority actions need to be taken? I suppose in addition to all those that we've discussed today. And okay, so we've got some answers already. Awareness raising, yeah, I mean, I guess it is a priority, but I wonder if there's ways that we can kind of embed that more into every part of our the strategy. For us, understanding native population size to inform captive breeding. So something that I think it's been mentioned is eDNA, and I know it's very early stages, but as a non-invasive method, certainly with fish, assessing population size is something that's possible. But I appreciate there's probably a lot of difficulties with crayfish DNA, especially in running systems. But yeah, no, I totally agree. Further linking with rivers trusts is a good, yeah. I mean, I suppose there's a general point about linking up more generally and knowing who to turn to. Okay. Needing to target anglers and water sports. So do you think that anglers and water sports need specific awareness raising about white claw crayfish, or is that's more of a biosecurity issue, I guess, and disease? I would have thought. But the idea of getting anglers interested in white claw crayfish conservation specifically does appeal to me a lot, because it's, you know, they're going to be interested. I would have thought it's definitely a group of people who would be interested. In Leicestershire, the EA and partners are in the early stages of setting up an INS local action group. Here, our focus is on collaboration and working with partners to tackle disease spread. Okay, who's that from? RB, would you be able to give a bit more information on that? And who's involved with the local action group?
It's Rachel Bentley here. I'm from the Environment Agency. I'm a biodiversity officer currently working down in the Leicestershire area. As I say, it's a very early stages. There's partners in the Leicester area who were collaborating together to form a local action group and target wider INS, not just American signal crayfish. But again, that's on our agenda, hopefully for the future.
So is that looking at both white claw crayfish and invasive species simultaneously?
I guess it would be in by extrapolation, it would be. So it's predominantly focusing on spread of INS as opposed to white claw crayfish. One of the things we discussed was obviously getting a better idea initially of where the white claw crayfish are within Leicester and putting together sort of a distribution map as to where they are and just get an up-to-date view of where American signal crayfish are. Also, there's potential for spread. So yes, as I say, it's in very early stages. We're just getting the data together first to hopefully focus our efforts in the future.
Yeah, it's an important point. I spend a lot of my days looking at the National Biodiversity Network records, which, whilst they're fantastic, it's not always it's not always easy to know how up to date the specifically the white claw crayfish occurrence records are, because sadly something that's 10 years out of date might not really be there anymore. Right, so here we have our first polling question. Should we aim to have ARC sites in all regions? Okay, we have one no. It's a lot in support of having across the board Would anyone who's given a no answer be happy to kind of expand a bit on the reasons why it's not good to have it in every single one of our regions?
Ben Rushbrook from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. I think obviously we want them in most regions, but it's got to be reflective of the original distribution. So I don't think we should be trying to put them in sites that doesn't have the water chemistry and the geology for them is the only reason I say no. So I'd expect it to be very widespread. I'd hope it very widespread. I think we just got to be a bit make sure it's appropriate where we're putting them.
So using historical records to help guide, historical distribution records to help guide the locations rather than just across the board.
So to guide, that's not to say they shouldn't maybe be putting areas if it's got the right locations for crayfish. I'm not saying it can only be within the historical range, but I also think we want to be careful that well-meaning people don't try and set up arc sites in areas where you're never going to be able to support them.
I don't know how many people are aware of the arc sites in Scotland, which kind of poses an interesting kind of conservation scenario whereby they're not natively found up that far, and yet it's almost that they are very out of harm's way in many ways. So there's kind of pros and cons. Right, on to our second theme, and this is a bit more in my wheelhouse, is the invasive crayfish priority actions. So what are you currently doing in your region in relation to invasive crayfish management? And so I suppose that could range from just surveying and collation of records through to control, containment. It'd be really interesting to know if anyone's thinking actively about what ways to physically contain invasive crayfish, because they are notoriously difficult to control, but containment in many cases might be a bit more of a viable option. Can I ask, Chris, what you're using to, what the method of control is?
Yeah, we're working on a project within the Riverline catchments, which is just to the north of Nottingham City. And it's a white-clawed crayfish stronghold. It's always had really good populations of white-clawed crayfish there. And over the last, about 7 years ago, we found a population of signal crayfish in some fishing ponds within the catchment. This is why I was the one who said I think we should need to be working with anglers. I think anglers move crayfish around quite a lot, and I think they're responsible for the spread of crayfish. Certainly in Nottinghamshire, there's an association with fishing ponds and signal crayfish. So on our project on the Lean catchment on these fishing ponds, we've been trying to catch them out by trapping and netting and refuge trapping them over the last 5 years. They're two tiny, relatively tiny little fishing ponds, and we've caught 35,000 signal crayfish over the last 5 years. At the end of the last season, we started to see signs of beginning to break the population. So yeah, I guess it's a case of it's still early days really, because it's all volunteer led. And we do follow very stringent biosecurity guidance. So all the kit that we use on the site remains on the site and doesn't go anywhere else as well. And we dispose of the crayfish on site in a freezer that's on site as well. So biosecurity is a very big part of it, as is promotion. We talk to all the people who kind of wander around the ponds as well, and there's a large visitor footfall through the site as well. So yes, it's an ongoing thing. So hopefully this summer, this spring, we're hoping to find that we are the suggestion of our catch numbers last autumn roll through to this spring, and we're actually beginning to see some success with that.
I don't suppose you're measuring any of the. Do you get an idea of what size class?
We've been following Stephanie PA's survey guidance, so we measure every individual. So we've got measurements for 35,000 crayfish from the site, and we've also got around 100 volunteers in total, but probably a core of about 20. So we've got some really well-trained volunteers now, and obviously we're being able to throw them onto other projects around the county, mainly monitoring white-clawed crayfish in other catchments.
Cool. Well, it shows, yeah, it's the community engagement and use of volunteers is really important. Okay, we didn't get to look at too many answers there, but that was very interesting. So now as a poll, should there be a national strategy for invasive crayfish management? And there are already bits and pieces that kind of contribute to this. There's an invasive alien species action plan for signal crayfish. There's been some mention of it. There was a DEFRA management measures document released a couple of years ago that goes through some of the national objectives on how to deal with them or what the priorities should be. But I think it's more a case of kind of joining the dots, and it's an overwhelming response to have for there to be a national strategy. But there is, of course, there's a national, there's at least a draft white-claw crayfish national strategy. So I suppose this is talking about having an almost a counterpart to that. Just devil's advocating, does anyone want to give a reason for not having the strategy? They're not sure. Go on, Andy.
Let's not forget that.
Oh, sorry, Nikki, go.
Sorry. The reason I voted no is because I don't think we know enough, and a strategy at this point, I don't think it would be effective because we don't really have any effective methods, and people can just waste an awful lot of time and money on not achieving anything. And I think if a strategy was to be created now, it should be really a research strategy rather than a doing stuff strategy.
I'd like to come in there and support Nikki Green's comments. All over Europe and in the UK since the late 1990s, people have been attempting to control non-native crayfish by various means of physical removal. In pretty much all cases, they've achieved a reduction in catch per unit effort, which of course is lost as soon as people run out of steam to carry on that intensive level of effort, or the funding runs out. Thereafter, it tends to become a sustainable harvest. So to my mind, that we just don't have a method at present which is effective at controlling these established populations. So personally, I would much rather see people's interest in crayfish directed towards the conservation of white-clawed crayfish populations rather than attempts to do manual removal or whatever. I've just seen, so much effort go in over such a long period of time. Everybody thinks that they'll succeed where everyone else hasn't, and every time they don't. I'd love to be proved wrong on this, but so far it's nothing. Sorry to pour cold water on things, and I respect the work that's being done. But
I think that some manual methods do have a lot of potential, but the thing where they fall down is that they're not done for long enough. So, you know, I'm in year 7 on Exmoor, and I'm getting results, and perhaps by year 10, you know, I might have had an 80% decrease, but it really is a very long-term undertaking.
Even a reduction to 20% is still a sustainable population, which may continue to have ecological impacts, and which definitely has the potential to continue spreading. So I would say never attempt these things in a watercourse, because the limits of detection are such that crayfish are spreading out when you can't actually detect them, even with intensive manual survey efforts. We know this from the work that's been done in Ribblesdale on Buckelbill Beck.
I think Stephanie, just from a point of view, sorry to interrupt, from a point of view from Nottinghamshire, this is a closed pond system, so I guess that is different, and I think it's worth trying. I mean, it's voluntary. It's not got the great cost for the taxpayer, and I think it's worth trying and continuing with it to see how we get on. As you say, a lot of the projects have folded before they've gone too far, so it'd be interesting to have that data to add to the data set.
Sure. I mean, some of them have only gone on for 5 or 10 years. I think there's one I know of in Switzerland which has gone on for about 15 plus, and they haven't achieved a reduction even in a kind of 1 hectare pond. So, you know.
Can we hear from Andrew? Sorry, Andrew, you've been very patient there with your hand up.
Yeah, have Andrew. I was just going to say the same thing, Jen. Yeah.
It's all right, no problem. I think I'd agree with Stephanie and Nikki. We would need to think about what a strategy would actually achieve. Let's not write strategies for strategy's sake. I think it could be part of the white-clawed crayfish strategy, or it could be part of, or absolutely should be part of, any invasive non-native species strategies we have in the UK. Also, let's not forget that it isn't really, we need to think about what we're saying about what we mean when we say national, because environment and nature conservation is very much a devolved issue. So it would be national strategies if we were going to go down that route.
Well, those were really good points, and it kind of like neatly leads on to this next question. So particularly with respect to kind of the research needs and things like that, what additional priority actions need to be taken with respect to invasive species, invasive crayfish management? So obviously, both Stephanie and Nikki mentioned there the requirement for more research, and obviously I think that's an answer to pretty much all conservation questions at the end of the day. But yeah, so the gene drive, I went to a very interesting talk towards the end of last year on gene drive that was it promised a lot. It did look very enticing in terms of being able to sterilize large numbers of animals, but there is obviously a lot of issues ethically with that. So more research, more education, prevent, yeah, the TV chef epidemic from a few years ago was a bit of a red herring. But yeah, public awareness on the right terms, I think is it's part and parcel with biosecurity message and with the general white-clawed crayfish conservation awareness raising. I mean, obviously the answer is that we should be teaching children this at school. We need to get in early. Barriers to biosecurity research, such as awareness, perceptions, uptake across user groups. So again, it's some of this, it's like identifying pathways and key users such as anglers that has been mentioned a few times. More research on preventing spread. I think I mentioned this before, but physical structures to prevent movement, I find that even in naturally existing structures, and trying to understand how that might minimize upstream spread. I think that they're quite fruitful areas to look at. All right, are we on to the next one? So this is the next theme that we're going to talk about on regional crayfish targets. Should there be regional crayfish targets for crayfish management? We've already had a poll on the regional captive breeding, but I suppose that could extend to different regional targets for invasive species management, or targets for trying to maintain populations within their existing locations, or to translocate them. But there's a lot more don't knows on this.
Yes, hi Rupert, it's Ian here. I'm just thinking about this in terms of sort of the favourable conservation status that we do through the Article 17 reporting back to the EU, which will have stopped now. The final one's due in, I think. And I think sort of the regional thing, I would think of it in terms of catchments or sub-catchments in their historic range, rather than kind of county boundaries and that kind of thing. And each catchment will have its own intricacies and pressures, and some are more urban than others. The people you need to engage with will be different. So I think kind of you could almost have a higher level strategy and then a specific one lower that covers those points, referencing the national one. And that's kind of the approach we've taken in the book in terms of how to develop your own local strategy. So those national strategies are there to be referenced, but you can get down to the specifics of your own in your local area.
Okay, yeah, sorry, we're on to how could these targets be set? So Ian mentioned the different national strategy framework there that things could be fed into. And within a catchment management plan, say, or within a catchment level management, should these things be set at a national level, or as Ian was suggesting, through catchment, mid and long-term targets. So to be able to actually measure progress as you go through, so achievable targets over the right time frames. So the draft strategy document needs to become live from Tim. 5 regional. So the invasive species, the regional invasive species management plans have been a first attempt at this, I guess. And again, maybe these are things that need to be fed back into with any future strategies and targets, because it was a good start point to start thinking about, at least from an invasive species perspective, how to set regional priorities and targets, and kind of identifying different alert species and things like that, and even species for management priority. So again, a call for background data and occurrence record collation. Locally set targets feeding up to regional and national. So I suppose the regional, the regional invasive management plans is a conduit through that, to help with that kind of thing. Okay. So the last question on regional crayfish targets is, how could delivery of these targets be coordinated? Who do you think should be responsible for coordinating this, and how do we link up all of the stakeholders within the delivery of these targets? Someone mentioned earlier about sort of greater inclusion with the Rivers Trust, which again I think I would echo on this. I feel like that's they're a good network to help coordinate these things. Do we have anyone from Scotland who is involved with the rafts, Rivers Trust? So Wildlife Trust again would be a really good. Do people think that having forums like this can help in the kind of strengthening of bonds? Needs resourcing. So the Environment Agency seemed to be given the share of the responsibility on this, but that totally makes sense. And I suppose there's quite a lot of local action groups that are specific. They're actually not crayfish focused, but there are so many local action groups that are invasive species driven more generally. And I wonder how much interest there are amongst those to kind of tap into crayfish matters, because it is a very captivating. Certainly from an invasive species perspective, there's so many people involved in invasive plants. Would you be able to talk a bit more about the local nature recovery strategy, Ian?
Yeah, so Northumberland was one of the areas where we had a pilot local nature recovery strategy. And it was one of the pilots that were put forward by DEFRA. I can't remember how many there were in total. I wasn't involved in the development of it because I was on leave at the time. But it primarily worked with local authorities and other interest groups such as national parks, Natural England, etc., to set local targets and for both habitat and species recovery. On a sort of a regional / local level. So the pilots are fed into a document which I can post in the chat, lessons learnt from, and there'll be an expectation that there will be other local nature recovery strategies for the whole of the country nationally. How that's being parcelled up in terms of extent and spatiality, I'm not sure. It's all kind of, we're learning from it, and then we're going to be expected to do some new ones. But I think, you know, river restoration, returning natural processes and protected species are a definite focus of those. And I'm hoping there should be some funding available to that. And it should tie in as well with the new environmental land management schemes and biodiversity net gain and carbon sequestration and all that kind of thing as well. At the minute, it seems like there's kind of a big beast in terms of nature recovery at the minute, and it's just kind of figuring out how the pieces fit together. But I think that, along with CABA on sort of the aquatic side, would be very good.
Brilliant. Okay, so our final kind of theme that we are going to explore is biosecurity. What biosecurity do you currently adopt and why? But biosecurity is obviously quite a broad, there are lots of kind of different scales that you can conduct biosecurity at. So even talking about kind of slightly more strategically, are people identifying specific pathways that they believe invasive species can be introduced by, and kind of what measures are you taking to address those pathways? Or but that's kind of a more strategic scale. But are you using it check clean dry? Are you using any chemicals? Are you using site specific equipment? And please remember to add in where you are commenting from, or what your initials are. Use of Burcon, yeah. Ensure contractors follow biosecurity guidelines when working in rivers. That's a really good one, and that's something that we're often putting into our biosecurity plans, is to try and propagate not just to the immediate operators, but anyone who's contracted in. Who's
That's me, Stephen Morley, National Trust.
Whereabouts is that you're
well, that's throughout the Yorkshire and the Northeast. Whenever we've got river works, make sure we've got good biosecurity written into contracts.
Okay. Is there a kind of expected standard that you set?
Generally, sort of check clean dry, use of Burcon, and make sure that vehicles haven't been in other water bodies in the last few weeks, and if they have been, make sure they're all cleaned off and disinfected. Yeah, standard the crayfish requirements, really.
Cool. Well, it's good to know that people are building that into projects from the contractor's perspective.
Rupert, it's Ian here. We've had a case in the last month where there was some tree catchers on the River Wansbeck, and some subcontractors arrived with an excavator and kit that was just completely caked in mud, and they were turned away. And I think we're getting better at sort of saying, no, biosecurity is a priority, and the fault is on the contractor for not reading the contract properly. So they will carry the cost, and the work's having to be delayed because the potential risk is incredibly high.
Yeah.
And I think people are internally getting so much more aware of it, and it is good. I mean, I can't say we'll catch them every time, but particularly risks with pumps and subcontractors coming up from other areas that have invasive crayfish, non-indigenous crayfish species, are a massive risk for us.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear, and I'm sure that they'll take that on board for the next time that they're getting involved in similar projects. There was a comment from Yorkshire Water about identification of pathways. Would you be able to,
Yeah, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Steph.
Hi. Yeah, so we've done some work identifying some pathways of spread. Anglers are one of them, boaters are others, but other things to do with our staff, contractors, like we've been talking about, but also some tenants. So we do have angling, boating, farming tenants, and so looking at where we can have biosecurity into the paperwork associated with those, as well as the engagement of going and speaking and raising awareness.
Brilliant. That sounds quite comprehensive to me. What about how do people plan? I'd be interested to hear for people going out surveying and how they plan their surveys and yeah, there we go. That's a good one. New sets of waders for different catchments. Brilliant. Well, to be honest, all of these look very promising. Okay, yeah, should we go on to the next one, which is, I think, the measure you take. Do you think the measures you take are effective, and why not? Why or why not? It'd be interesting to know, I mean, if you're working on land consistently, if you can actually see whether there are others, well, whether it's crayfish or not, if there are invasive species actually still colonizing, if people are keeping tabs on that. It's a very difficult thing to monitor, really, unless you're yeah, hopeful. Yeah, I think it's definitely a question that research can try to address, but it's very difficult to keep tabs on. There was a good paper out a few years ago that was looking at the use of biosecurity measures around angling, and it had quite a kind of confusing message. I think it was like there was a decrease in uptake over the years of biosecurity measures, and yet the awareness had increased, but the amount of uptake had decreased or something. So it's quite an interesting social conundrum of how do you get people to kind of permanently change their behavior. Yeah, there's a lot of people saying the same thing. I mean, it's good that people are positive and they're not giving up, and everyone is just doing the methods, doing the biosecurity protocols themselves. And it also sounds like it's kind of baked into a lot of people's way that they talk about conservation of white-clawed crayfish in general. We undertake education and active monitors of contractors. What? Oh, okay. Okay. Let's move on to what additional information do you require in relation to biosecurity measures? So I guess things like if you're check cleaning and drying, how long do you dry things for? Or there's a whole variety of different things like washing and using hot water, and would people be interested in knowing the specific details on these types of protocols, or are you all comfortable you're operating at highly effective measures?
Hi Rupert, it's Ian here. We've had contractors wanting to work on white-clawed crayfish watercourses where they've used sort of heat. They've sort of said they'll use steam cleaning and the like for the undercarriages of excavators and vehicles, but we didn't feel that was really the science hadn't been proved at that point. I think that's more of like a forestry application. So I think when you get biosecurity across different, you got your terrestrial and your aquatic kind of habitats, the threats and the risks and the treatment can be very different, I think. and people can get mixed up. And I guess the other thing is, like, I'm not trying to put it on contractors, because I think that they're really willing to learn, but sometimes it's a copy and paste job. You know, it's like, oh yeah, we'll follow the information on the invasive non-native species secretariat website. It's all right. Well, which page? Because I'll be quite honest, I struggle with that website sometimes to find any practical guidelines. Yeah, it's the one that we reference to. So I think that would maybe be a comment from me really. I think we really need clear practical guidance. You know, videos. I know Leeds, University of Leeds have done a training module that's available online. I think it's free, and you can ask contractors and others to go on that, just to raise awareness.
Yeah, I mean, the Secretariat website is not it's not totally user friendly, but there are some very good videos on there, and I think it breaks it down by almost by sector, but I'm not sure how extensive the different sectors are and whether that covers things like terrestrial contractors or forestry forestry contracts or anything like that. But it is a really great resource, and it's something that I would kind of like to see them do more of, if the funding's there enough, obviously. It would be nice to have non-chemical options. We've got a site that's quite remote up in Scotland, and it's very difficult to it's a really difficult biosecurity challenge because it's remote. You don't really want chemicals lying around. You don't want people accidentally introducing them into the water, but you can't get hot water. You can't, the best you can really do is water and a brush. And I mean, I know, I feel confident that that's better than nothing. But yeah, it can be quite tricky. But a guidance document like that, where it almost breaks it down by scenario, I think would be a really useful thing.
Rupert, it's Ian here again. Sorry to butt in again. We've just managed to spend quite a bit of money that was sourced nationally from the Environment Agency to buy more equipment for some of our field-based staff. And some of those include battery-powered pressure washers that are really quite compact. And they're really good for getting rid of sort of bits on boots and that, and then it's followed up with a hand spray of Virkon afterwards. So you're not like pumping 4 litres of Virkon dosed water. You're getting rid of most of the stuff, and then it's just like a hand spray afterwards. And that seems to be working really well. Plus, you sort of sell it by saying, well, you know, the inside of your car isn't going to be as muddy, and then suddenly everyone's really interested in having it.
Yeah, well, that's a message that I often try and convey, is it's for the sake of your car. For those handheld pressure washers, are they plugged into the car, or are they actually completely sort of self-sufficient?
Yeah, there's two we've trialing. One is 15 litres, and that is battery powered and mains chargeable. The other is 4 litres that's mains chargeable but runs off battery, but has, if you buy it, a cigarette lighter attachment as well. And so what we're doing instead of going for the 15 litres, going for the 4 litre ones, and then providing a 5 litre jerry can of additional water in a recycled plastic bottle to have in the back of the car. So if you're out on site and you run out of charge, you just plug it in. If you run out of water, you just top it up. And that seems to be working really well.
Yeah, I like the idea of that. I wonder how much it might cost, but I do. It sounds.
I can tell you how I mean, yeah, Halfords are very happy with us at the minute, because they were the cheapest. I think it was 110 for the portable pressure washer, and then 80p for the 5 litre bottle, and then I think maybe £20 for the car charger. So you're talking about 130 quid, 140 quid for a full kit, I guess, including a spray bottle and a tub of Virkon, you know, tablets or what do you call it, powder.
Okay,
and I'm happy to share that around.
Actually doesn't sound totally groundbreakingly expensive. Sorry, just so for the last question, people are already polling in. should we do an annual workshop just like this? I guess, as I mentioned, this is sort of like the baseline, and just the answers that I've been reading in the last hour or so have already been really interesting. So would people be interested in doing a kind of repeat version of this? And I like to think that I'm fairly familiar with all the different survey methodologies and sampling and whatnot, but there are things that I've learned this morning, like the use of survey dogs and the use of bracken bundles and things like that, that I didn't know people were doing. And it's amazing to hear that that some of these slightly more novel approaches are being explored. Nobody has said no, which is quite reassuring.
Yeah, we really wanted to have this as a face-to-face, but I think there's no way we would have been able to engage with as many people. And it's been so fantastic to have everyone's input. It's exactly what we wanted and what's needed, I think.
Yeah, I would.
A face-to-face in the future would be good, though, for sure.
Yeah, and I think in the chat, what's been really nice is that we've had a comment about, will we have another National Crayfish Conference? And I think absolutely, and in person is great because that's when you can chat. What we're going to try and do is collate all this information. So I've got everybody's contact details and from the email that you sent. So then we'll try and collate all the information and share that along with the recording of the actual morning as well. So a massive thank you to you all, a huge thank you to all our speakers, and to Rupert for doing a sterling job being Paul. Thank you so much. And just a quick word, because Ian has just mentioned to me that we didn't actually ever sort of show you a live copy of the book. So just to sort of show, it is quite large, just because you don't really get an idea of size. So here we are. Here's the book in all its glory. And obviously you've got the link if you want to purchase it, and if you also want to sort of all the case studies are also in the back as well. So thank you for that. Ian.
Yeah, am I just signing off here, Jen? I didn't have anything specific to do, did I? Or did I? Apologies.
No, not at all. I just wondered if you wanted to say thank you. And there's Karis as well, so a thank you to Karis as well.
Yeah, no, thank you to Karis. And yeah, I just want to say as well, it's been absolutely fantastic working with Jen. This has all been done remotely, mainly due to COVID. We did meet up in London once, but I typed, there's a Noble House. Jen's laughing here. There's a DEFRA office called Noble House, but I spelt it incorrectly and ended up going to a block of flats in the middle of London called Noble House.
We ended up in a really nice pub though.
We had to decamp to yeah, it was good. Yeah, we just had like about 50 pages of A4 on the table. But yeah, it's been an experience. Yeah, it was an experience doing it remotely, but it's just, yeah, I think we've worked really well together. We kind of picked the bits of the book that we're most experienced in, and you know, it's been great. I just wanted to say that, Jen, it's been fantastic working with you on it. So we got there.
Thank you. We need to give each other virtual flowers now, don't we, or something else? Or I'll give you some.
Yeah, but yeah, it's what I'm hoping is it's a useful document for everyone to use. You know, hopefully it'll bring that consistency that's needed nationally, and yeah, hopefully it'll answer all your questions and queries and dreams on crayfish.
Brilliant. Okay, so if anybody's got any comments, or I think it's time to sign off. And apologies for running over a little bit, but thank you to Karis for trying to keep us on track. Well done, and for facilitating so well. And thank you again to all the speakers and to all our editors, to the reviewers, to all the funders. We couldn't have done it without you, and I especially couldn't do it without you. So thank you.
Fabulous day. Well done.
Thank you, Kate. All right, guys.
Thank you, everyone. See you soon, hopefully.
Thanks very much.
Happy crayfishing. Bye-bye.